Hey guys, tonight we step out into heat that moves like a slow animal over the ground, while cicadas saw the dusk in half and a sky of hammered copper drifts toward the blue-black. The stone under your feet gives your souls a toast you didn't ask for. Out on the flats, a hyena laughs like it just told itself a joke. Reality check out here millions of years ago. You probably won't survive this without a few quiet superpowers, and we're about to borrow them. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you, your location and local time. Help me imagine the room I'm keeping you company in. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move with a small band along a sandy ribbon between thorn and reed, not marching so much as flowing, always giving the sun a respectful berth. The trick isn't to fight the climate, it's to collaborate. You leave while dawn still smells like cold stone and mint idle at noon, when even lizards argue for shade, and walk again when every rock grows a longer shadow, as if the land is lending you a little extra roof. Your body is your first shelter. Long legs, springy tendons, a chest that pumps like bellows, and skin, tuned for cooling more than display. Light joke 1, the outfit is breathable, which is ancient for you own exactly one layer. Mainstream fact among mammals, humans are champion sweaters. Dense eccrine glands pour moisture onto your skin so passing air can carry heat away, letting you plod for hours, while fur-clad predators must stop to pant. You don't outrun antelope with speed, you outlast them with stubbornness and evaporation. Your height parks more of you in moving breeze, your long Achilles tendons store and return energy like organic springs, and your hair thins where air needs to sweep. Light joke 2, your air conditioning runs on water and attitude, and somehow the warranty never expires. The land is a tidy liar, always beautiful, sometimes generous. You learn to read it like a slow book. Darker green on the horizon means papyrus, and papyrus means water. A tall stack of white clouds hints at cool wind off distant slopes. A low brown smear at ground level warns of dust that wants to eat your eyes. You stitch your route from scraps of shade shadow of a boulder of a baobab of the person in front of you, and you practice a small art turning your body sideways to a hot gust so less of you has to argue with it. When the track blisters, you walk the shadow-stitched edge as if the sun's a landlord, and shade is a loophole in the lease. When insects throng at sundown, you lean into old chemistry. Quirky tidbit, you smear a paste of red ochre mixed with animal fat onto your arms and face, a trick some desert people still use to cut glare, make biting flies less enthusiastic and look a little more like sandstone than a snack. The paste dries into a soft crust. You look like the world sculpted you, which honestly it did. You also let smoke do your swatting. A smouldering bundle of punky wood tucked under a windbreak keeps midges philosophical and smells like the closest thing to incense this campsite is going to get. Historians still argue whether early bands like yours cling to wooded mosaics and dash into open savanna only for quick errands, or whether you already thrive in the big grass, reading wind like scripture. You don't name the biome, you name the exits. If a ridge funnels a blast furnace, you slip into the lee where air calms. If the sand burns, you follow the shade-stitched path. You taste rain before you see it metal and leaf on your tongue, and you angle toward higher ground before gullies turn into opinions about swimming. Wider lens for a moment during the Pleistocene Earth's climate rides a seesaw of glacial and interglacial phases. Grasslands expand and shrink, lakes appear and vanish, corridors open and close. You live inside those pulses, listening to the planet breathe, so you keep informal calendars. A certain constellation rises when the first true night winds arrive. A certain bird calls days before heavy weather. You time rests and departures not by numbers, but by signs written in wind and water, an astronomy of ankles and lungs. You drink knowledge before you drink water. Hippo paths score the mud like bullet points. Follow them the wrong way and you meet teeth, follow them the right way and you reach a seep. A halo of greener grass radiates from a termite mound. Dig there and the ground exhales coolness into your cupped hands. You carry a gourd when you can, a folded leaf when you can't, and sometimes nothing but a memory of which hollow log hides a cached sip. You share the rule that keeps all the other rules alive because c'est beau. Because a private stash means nothing if the band around you wilts. Your people talk in nods as much as words. A finger to a long straight cloud means later wind. A flat low wave says keep silhouettes small on the ridge. You make weather by moving well, turning pace into a dial slower into heat, brisker into chill with the pauses in leaf-stitched shade where your pulse can rewrite itself. Light joke 3. You call this extreme hiking, but the mountain refuses to collab, so you settle for still being here. Fringe whispers travel with you. Someone carries a coal in the belly of a hollow bone tendered each hour, with a breath and a shred of grass, a kind of pocket lightning for days when the sky is out of the office. Maybe it's habit, maybe it's luck. Historians still argue whether the earliest steady guardians of flame walk the world yet, or whether keeping fire becomes common only later. You don't publish a paper, you hedge your bets, shelter the ember, and let its faint warmth keep mosquitoes judgmental rather than enthusiastic. Night lays a cool hand on the plain. Stars stitch bright holes in the fabric of dark, and the wind that bullied at noon now behaves like a helpful cousin. You wrap your shoulders, feel the ochre paste crackle lightly on your skin, and learn the second lesson of harsh climates: cold is just heat travelling the wrong way. You curl so less of you touches ground, tuck your hands under your chin to capture breath warmth, and let the earth's slow heartbeat steady your own. Tomorrow will ask the same questions. How will you borrow wind-bent sun, follow water, and your body already holds the answers, quiet as coals under ash. You straighten to your full height and feel the wind finally notice you. Upright, you turn into a narrow sail, less body baking under the noon blast. More skin in the moving air that steals heat like a polite thief. Long legs set a metronome hips, a careful hinge shoulders, loose neck free. The land stops being a wall and becomes a panorama. Predators that once materialized from grass now appear as subtractions from the horizon. And with each lazy, resilient stride, you discover that walking on two legs isn't a party trick, it's a climate strategy. Your feet, newly famous in this story, are marvels. A springing arch loads and releases with each step. The big toe lines up with the others for push-off, and the heel acts like a sturdy landing pad that doesn't complain much. You're very literally a machine for turning distance into survival. Mainstream historical fact is those fossil footprints at Laetoli in Tanzania, pressed into ash about 6 million years ago, show a committed heel-to-toe roll and a non-grasping big toe, a biped's calling card travelled across deep time in stone. You pad forward with that same pattern, each step a quiet handshake with the earth. Standing tall also promotes cooling. Your torso presents less surface directly to the vertical sun, and the breeze slips past more of your wet skin. Yes, wet, because you've got an outrageous number of eccrine sweat glands humming away. A thin film forms and the wind cashes it in for heat loss. You're a walking swamp cooler, but classier. Long limbs help too by the simple geometry of heat. A tall, narrow body sheds warmth more efficiently than a short, stocky one. One reason tropical populations often carry that sleek, elegant silhouette that deserts reward. Like joke one, your runway walk is less fashion, more function. No red carpet, just red dust. The head stays steady as the world moves. A slender ligament running from skull to spine keeps your gaze level, a little strap called the nuchal ligament. Rare among apes, handy when you're trotting, after a herd or glancing back at a lion who would very much like you to make a poor choice. That quiet stability turns you into a better weather watcher. You sweep the horizon for anvils of cloud scan, for the woolly bellies of mammatus that hint at turbulent skies, read the streak of virga rain that falls and evaporates before it kisses the ground as a sign of dry air ruling aloft. You don't have a weather app. You have an entire torso. Earlier you smeared ochre and fat on your arms to take the edge off sun and insects. Now as sweat carves little roads through the pigment, you recognise what that paint also does. It exaggerates airflow. A ripple cools, a gust chills, and you get a tactile weather map right on your skin. Quirky tidbit: on brutally hot days, you wedge a twist of damp moss or chewed succulent under your grass. Headband, your very own forehead reservoir, so trickles can trace cooling paths past your temples. Is it stylish? Only if alive is this season's look, which it always is. The stride becomes a plan. You take long, easy steps in heat shorter, quicker ones in cold. You loosen the shoulders into a pendulum, let the arms counter-rotate with the legs and keep your centre of mass floating so your head barely bobs. Every ounce of smoothness saves a sliver of energy and shaves a crumb of heat. In the late afternoon, remember the ember. Riding in a bone from last night, you walk with enough pace to keep a breeze aimed at your own skin, but not so much you outpace your water budget. Slow cooking is for dinners and desserts, not your brain. Historians still argue whether bipedalism first paid off in open savanna for long-distance foraging in woodlands for efficient fruit harvesting, in shallow waters for wading and carrying, or as a hands-free solution for mothers and meat. The answer may be yes, as in many little wins adding up. Another lively debate whether hair thinning and dark melanin-rich skin, great for UV protection, emerged as a thermoregulation package with endurance walking and running, or whether parasites and social signalling also pulled on those threads. You don't weigh in, you weigh less when you're not carrying water you don't need. Clouds do theatre. In the morning they march as puffy, cumulus, honest, upright, fair-weather citizens. By noon some stack into towers flat-topped anvils that shout thunder farms. You read the spread of their tops like spilled milk pointing out where high winds shear them thin. Birds help swifts stitch frantic loops ahead of storm lines. Vultures wobble as thermals collapse under incoming shade. You angle your route accordingly to see never be the tallest thing on an open ridge. When the sky rehearses percussion, never get caught in a space that turns into a river if the clouds decide to drop their props. A sudden squall isn't just wet, it's a thermostat twist. You know the flip from heatstroke to shivering can be a short, rude slide, so you slide preemptively into a windbreak wrap, a hide that still smells faintly of smoke, bless that ember bone, and sit your evaporative engine down. Heat gained is heat banked. You breathe into cupped hands, then tuck them into your armpits to keep the deposit. When the squall laughs itself out and the world exhales petrichor, those fresh stony notes from rain-waking oils in the dust, you step back into your stride, cooler, steadier, watchful. Your hips deserve applause. The pelvis is a bowl that traded climbing swagger for walking grace. The gluteus maximus, enormous by primate standards, becomes your shock absorber and anti-wobble friend when you break into a trot. Endurance becomes your quiet superpower. You can move when most creatures must rest. You can keep a pace that is slow for minutes, but fast for hours. Light joke 2. If the step counts existed, your wrist rock would be bragging, and your brand deal would be with shoes but make them feet. And hands-free at last carry adaptation. A plucked reed marks wind direction. A loop of sinew and hide as a shoulder strap turns a gourd into a canteen. A small bundle of salty ash and crushed seeds replaces electrolytes after long, hot climbs. You test the air by lifting a handful of dust and watching it ghost away. You taste the horizon by lifting your chin to find the boundary where cool and warm layers slide like pages. You are always listening. Climate is conversation, not decree. There's a rhythm to harshness. Mornings carry promise, middays demand humility. Evenings repay patience. Bipedalism lets you ride that rhythm with less fuss. You can wade shallow channels without soaking everything. Vital cross-stretches of waist-high grass with only a ribbon of you exposed stand above brush to negotiate with thorns by sight rather than by feel. You keep your silhouette small against the sky when you must crest a ridge, bending knees and waist in a fluid crouch so you look like a rock that forgot to be still. And when it's time to hunt, or more often to forage on the move, you learn a patience that would seem ridiculous if it weren't so effective. You don't sprint, you angle watch, keep a herd in view, step where wind says you're nobody. Heat is your ally, your quarry must stop to pant, hide in shade and cool a tongue that betrays it. You just keep walking. Light joke 3, persistence hunting is basically the world's slowest race where the prize is dinner and the medal is still upright. By night, your vertical advantage becomes a different kind of safety. You stand to scan for eyeshine, sit to shrink your outline, lie to hide. You place your back to a termite mound, a warm breathing hill that remembers the day's sun and returns it kindly to your spine. The stars swing. You label them with nicknames, not lecture notes, because names are handles and handles keep stories from falling. The ochre on your arms is cracked into little maps. The smoke from your careful ember keeps insects philosophical. The wind has tired itself out and for once forgives you. Tomorrow the heat will test your angles again, and the storm drama may audition anew. But upright sweating and long striding, you already carry the answers in bone and breath. You aren't conquering the climate, you're choreographing with it a partner dance where you lead with patience and follow with attention. The horizon stretches, your feet remember, your head stays level, and the world, harsh as it is, keeps stepping aside just enough to let you pass. You crouch beside river stones and turn hunger into geometry. A heavy cobble rides your palm, an anvil steadies your knees, a smaller hammerstone warms in the other hand. One crisp strike, a quick twist, and the cobble sheds a shining flake thin, impatient, ready to argue with anything fibrous. Edge happens, the day loosens a little. You aren't sculpting, you're negotiating with fracture. Hit near a prepared platform, and the stone answers with a conchoidal bloom, a ripple like frozen water. Miss the angle, and you get dust sparks and a lecture from your thumb. In minutes you've gathered a bouquet of triangles and razors, each one capable of turning a carcass, a tuber, or a strip of hide into permission to keep breathing. Light joke 1, you've basically invented that the Swiss Army rock no corkscrew, but plenty of open bone. Mainstream historical fact, archaeologists call this simple toolkit Oldowan, and the earliest widely accepted examples in East Africa date to a little more than 2. 6 million years ago, flakes, cores and hammerstones that transform scraps into supper. You work with the same logic. A core is both tool and mother of tools. Flakes do the cutting. Battered hammerstones handle the loud conversations. There's a geometry of leftovers on the plain. Vultures pinwheel above a rib cage. Hyenas giggle in the brush like comedians who don't actually want you to enjoy yourself. You don't need the lion's steak. You want what teeth couldn't quite manage. With a fresh flake, you unzip the leather of a hide where tendons keep it stubborn. Shave silvery threads where muscle gives up reluctantly, and free little rafts of fat that stick to your fingertips. The flavour is necessary with notes of necessity. Then the percussion starts. You settle a long bone on the anvil. Shoulder a glance around. Nobody likes a surprise hyena and bring the hammerstone down. The sound is a clean ring with a gritty aftertaste, a bell that thinks it's also a drum. A second blow spiderwebs the shaft, a third opens a window. Red-brown marrow gleams like living candle wax, rich with energy your day can't afford to refuse. You scoop it with a stick or a finger, letting it melt into you while the wind takes careful notes. Historians still argue whether those earliest cut and percussion marks famously reported on bones from Ethiopian sites prove that your ancestors were primary hunters sneaking in early or confrontational scavengers darting between a carnivore's courses to steal the best bits before hyena teeth wrote their signatures. You don't submit a paper, you submit your lunch and you eat it. Plants get their turn. Underground storage organs, tubers, corms, rhizomes hide like batteries beneath cracked soil, waiting out bad weather the way you wait out noon. You memorise their leaves and the faint green halos that betray moisture. You pry them loose with a digging stick, hardened over last night's ember. Remember the travelling coal in the hollow bone. Many taste like punishment before they taste like food. So you pound them on a flat slab until the cells say Uncle rinse the bitterness where water allows roast thin slices in coals and bully the starch into cooperation. With a flake you shave off hairy skins. With a club you turn hard into chewable. With patience you turn chewable into fuel. Your tools multiply not by number, but by behaviour. A serrated flake scraped across the hide raises a soft nap and worries grit from pores so leather will bend instead of bite. A rib thinned and polished against sandstone becomes a gentle scraper that loves curves good for smoothing, good for pride. A splinter of long bone points itself into an awl. Paired with a lace of plant fibre, it suddenly means shoes belts and bundles. Quirky tidbit, you twist wet leg sinew into cord and let it dry. Those fibres shrink as they set cinching tight like natural zip ties that never read the manual. Stone has moods. Fine-grained basalt, tidy quartzite, and chert. If you can find it, you learn which pieces sing when struck and which sulk into gravel. You start hearing the river's conversation. A glossy, dark cobble might carry a sharp secret. A pitted, sugary one will only waste your time. You prepare tiny platforms, red bulbs of percussion like weather, and learn to flip a core in your hand with the easy grace of someone who has used these moves since last season's rains. You give distance a chance to help. Even without fletching or barbs, a light shaft with a flake hafted at the tip lets you deliver a firm suggestion from a safer place. The binding is plant fibre sinew, or a twist of inner bark. The adhesive, when you can coax it, is pitch teased from resin and thickened with a pinch of ash. Later descendants will perfect teardrop hand axes and almost sculptural symmetry, but for now, version 1 is stabby stick. Light Joke 2 patch notes read, "Now with 30% more stick." Food widens when you have edges. Seeds stop being decoration and start being calories. You carry a shallow quern and a rounded minnow 2 stones that know each other's names, and bruise wild grains or beans into a fragrant course meal. Toast the mix on a warm slab until the green taste walks off. Fold in a thumb of sauvre marrow, and you've got portable fuel that rides your pouch without leaking. If your brand manager asks, the product is paleo granola, and the ad spend is exactly 0. Edges also keep you clean or clean enough to stay welcome in your own skin. A careful pass of a flake trims ragged nails before they snag. A sliver of bone works as a toothpick when a fibre lodges like an unhelpful idea. Yes, ancient teeth really show tiny grooves from habitual toothpicking. Your small comforts can outlive you. Ash with its alkaline bite becomes your first soap. Gritty sand becomes your first pumice. You smoke stubborn insects out of seams in your shelter and tell them to find another address. The ochre you smeared earlier tags favourite tools so they don't vanish into the ground's camouflage high visibility mode prehistoric edition. Sometimes the world is generous. An ostrich eggshell lies near a scraped out nest, thick and tough like porcelain that grew up outdoors. You tap a neat hole with a flake rinse it at a seep where reeds gossip, and suddenly you own a canteen. Later people will incise crosshatch designs and tally marks on shells like these, turning water into art and calendar. For you it's shade you can drink and a promise you can carry past noon. You cachet as insurance against the climate's personality. A cluster of hammerstones hides under a discreet cairn. A particularly delightful core. Oh, that edge goes in a crack you can find by feeling the dark. A few roasted tuber slices wrapped in hide become tomorrow's morning kindness. Tools teach you to think in later. Weather teaches you to respect now. Between them you walk a clean line. Historians still argue whether the leap from rough flakes to handsome hand axes reflects a new kind of planning mind able to see the tool inside the stone before it exists, or simply more patient practice during intervals when the climate allowed you to linger and experiment. From your seat on the ground, the debate sounds abstract. What you know is this: a sharper edge buys you time and time buys you gentleness. By twilight, the camp becomes an orchestra of textures. Scraper's rasp hammerstone thock a marrow-smeared stick crackles as it pretends to be a lamp. You dust your favourite flake with a little ochre, so it won't vanish against bare earth. Call it paint, call it high visibility mode, call it fondness. The ember in its bone cradle sighs when you feed it. Smoke braids into the dark. Insects grow philosophical again. Light Joke 3. The only unboxing video tonight is a femur. You tuck the tools within reach but out of tripping distance because midnight visits from weather or teeth are not theoretical. You pull a softened hide over your shoulders, curl, so less of, you argues with the cold ground and lay your hands still scented with stone rain tuber sap and that faint metallic joy of marrow across your ribs. Tomorrow you'll ask the rocks fresh questions and the rocks pleased to be useful will answer with edges. The climate will keep trying to act like a boss, you'll keep answering with tinkering. You feed the ember like it's a small demanding mouth. A nest of shredded bark waits in your palm dry grass, scuffed from the shade side of a boulder. Seed fluff teased from a pod. A curl of inner bark shaved thin with yesterday's Swiss Army rock. You tip the ember into the nest cup, your hands into a windproof cave, and breathe short, warm puffs, not a gale. The black coal blushes orange, then yellow. When the smoke turns from whisper to story, you lower the bundle to the kindling teepee, and their flame chooses this place. You learn quickly that fire is a listener. Too much wood and it sulks, too little breath and it dies of boredom. You place twigs like sentences, bigger sticks like chapters, and hold back the log until the plot is strong. Radiant heat spills into your shins and thighs, a gentle sun you can drag around with one hand. The night takes a respectful step back. Light joke 1, congratulations, you've domesticated lightning and it hasn't peed on the mat once. Warmth is only the first gift, the second is patience in your food. A tuber that fought you at noon fibres like braided rope now sighs open when you set slices on a hot stone at the edge of the coals. A strip of meat too stringy for manners becomes friendly after a slow roast that paints the air with browned sweetness. Mainstream historical fact controlled fire use shows up deep in the record ash and burned bone inside South Africa's Wonderwork cave around 1 million years ago, evidence that people like you tended flames where the wind couldn't have done it alone. You didn't invent dinner, but you certainly edited it. Cooking changes the math of survival. Heat denatures stubborn proteins, softens cell walls, and disarms a handful of plant poisons that would otherwise make a long night longer. Parasites and bacteria enthusiastic freeloaders lose their grip under the lid of a hot stone or in the simmer of a bark-bent pot. A pothole in rock, a stomach from a recent hunt, or on lucky days, an ostrich egg-shell cradle becomes your first saucepan. Your jaw gets a break, your gut gets a raise, and your night gets a calm you can spend on watchfulness instead of chewing. Smoke becomes your cloak and your curtain call. You damp a corner of the fire with green twigs and lay a braid of aromatic leaves across the coals. The air fills with a spicy haze that asks mosquitoes to reconsider their life choices. Quirky tidbit, a puck of dry dung. Yes, the plain brown truth smoulders long and steady, and its cool smoke is petty in all the right ways, bothering flies more than it bothers you. You waft the smudge around ankles, armpits, and the doorway of your little windbreak, then watch the insects write angry little circles that end somewhere else. Historians still argue whether your kind first wrangled flames by stealing them from wildfires and guarding them like royalty, or whether you already own the skills to kindle from scratch, twirling a fire drill until powdered wood turns to coal, sliding a fire plough along a groove, or pulling a rawhide fire thong back and forth like a bow until heat beads into life. The truth may be messy, some nights you borrow from the sky, some nights from friction, many nights from yesterday's coal. Whatever the origin, the rule is the same: never let tomorrow depend on luck if you can help it. Fire draws a circle that predators respect. Eyes blink at the edge of light, whiskers hesitate. You keep a brand beside you, a long limb with a charred angry end, and practice the little half lunge that convinces a hyena you're in a different mood than lunch. Charcoal darkens your palms. Ash softens your scent to something the grass already knows. Light joke 2, you're not fearless, you're just carrying a very opinionated stick. The circle also pulls your people inward. Faces bloom in the orange and every wrinkle becomes a map. You share marrow tales and tuber strategies. You plan tomorrow's water gamble. You sing the song that pretends to be about stars but is secretly about directions. Embers drift up like thoughts that forgot to land. The flicker lulls the day out of you. Some moderns would later measure how firelight lowers heart rate and hushes minds, but you learn it by feel, stare at flame, hear your pulse stroll instead of sprint. Find sleep in the slow breath of coals. Edges sharpen differently in this glow. You hold a flake to the fire's lip and warm it before scraping a hide. Fibres yield with fewer arguments. You harden a spear tip by toasting it, driving resin deeper into wood and nudging out a little water stronger, straighter, less splinter-prone when it matters. Later descendants will learn to heat-treat stone itself, baking cherts into silkier fracture, but for now your workshop smells like smoke and fat and the clean mineral bite of basalt dust. The light makes your hands look older and wiser than they did at noon. You decide to believe the lighting. There's housekeeping to fire. You clear a ring to keep the flames honest, keep a scoop of sand for tantrums and bury spent coals so the night doesn't wander off with your camp. You mark a no-spark zone near grass that gossips in dry seasons because nothing races faster than a prairie doing what prairies do. You learn to turn logs so the flames move where you want them, toward the cookstone, away from the hides, never under the sleeping shoulders of the most dramatic snorer. Light joke 3, you call that person lion bait, but only when they can't hear you over their own performance. Sometimes the fire is teacher, not tool. You watch how heat changes colour: wood to charcoal to ash yellow, flame to blue whisper, and you watch how air makes everything true or false. You blow gently when the coal is shy. You fan the teepee when the wood needs company. You discover that ash mixed with water makes a slick paste that scrub brushes pots, and even teeth a tiny chemistry lesson with a clean aftertaste. Charcoal ground to powder darkens your skin in patterns that mean this is us and this is tonight. Your ochre, your ash, your fat pigments and binders, and suddenly your bodies tell a story the wind can't erase. There are rest-of-life uses too. You light the ends of a bundle of reeds to seal it. You scorch the ends of cordage to stop the twist from forgetting itself. You soften pitch for hafting. You bake earth a little to toughen a hearth floor. On cold, mean mornings you warm the haft of a tool so your fingers don't argue about work. On nights when rain plays drums on the shelter and the ember sulks, you feed it powdered punky wood from a rotten log. You save the driest thing in a wet world because future you had your back yesterday. One last debate drifts past the flames with the smoke. Whether cooking itself, reshaped bodies and lives shrinking, chewing muscles, freeing hours once squandered on endless raw eating, bankrupting parasites and letting brains play with more expensive ideas, or whether it was just a pleasant accessory to an already capable animal. You let the scholars argue. You turn the tuber slice with a stick and listen to it hiss. Whatever the grand narrative tonight is simple warmth in your bones, sweet on your tongue, insects with other plans and a horizon that for once is not planning anything dramatic. You bank the fire when eyelids grow heavy, coals gathered like eggs, a thicker log laid across them as a slow promise, a flat stone set to throw heat back towards sleeping ribs. The brand waits within reach, its end sullen and ready. Beyond the ring, stars open their quiet market. The wind tries on different directions and decides to settle for none. You pull your hide close, smell smoke that's decided your family, and let the last crackles count you down to a sleep the dark can't argue with. Wind comes up sly and cold, and you answer it with architecture. A cave mouth is a giant's lip. You read its shape like weather. If the opening faces the prevailing wind smoke will argue and the night will cough you awake. If it yawns too deep, cold air pools like water in a bowl and your ankles dream of ice. So you choose an overhang with a back wall that remembers the day's sun, a ceiling high enough to forgive smoke and a ledge where the wind forgets your name. You're not hiding from the climate so much as negotiating a lease with its short-term renewal payable in watchfulness. First order of business flaws that don't bite. You gather armfuls of sweet grass and lay it thick, then top it with leaves that smell sharp and clean. Mainstream historical fact at South Africa's Sibudu Cave. People around 77,000 years ago built layered grass bedding laced with insect-repellent plants, nature's mattress with built-in bug control. You copy the idea without the archaeology. A sprinkle of ash under the mat makes ants reconsider. A dusting of fine sand keeps damp honest. Light, joke one, congratulations, you've invented memory foam that remembers you as warm lump, do not disturb. You build a hearth where the rock's curve will throw heat back towards sleeping ribs. The fire sits just outside the drip line, a polite distance from tinder-prone grass. Your brand, charcoal-nosed and self-confident, leans ready. You test the draft with a pinch of dust. If it slides upward and curls out the mouth, good. If it slaps your face like a wet leaf, you nudge the hearth or claim a different dent in the cliff. Callbacks help that ember riding in a hollow bone, remember, becomes a camp in 4 breaths, coals like little moons settling into their orbits. Rock shelters are lovely, but most of the world is not rock. So on open flats you grow your own cliffs. 3 forked sticks, a ridgepole, a hide thrown like a patient wave. There's your lean-to. You face its back toward the tantrum wind and pin the edges with stone lips. Brush piles become walls that murmur but don't shout. A woven mat of reeds turns into a door you can roll like a friendly cloud. Need a bigger room? Plant 2 arcs of saplings and bend them into a ribcage. Lash them with sinew and cleverness, thatch them with grass, and suddenly weather has a smaller mouth. Clothing begins as shelter you can walk in. A scraped hide worked over your knee with a flake scraper until it stops pretending to be an animal becomes a cape that laughs at drizzle and an attitude that shrugs off wind. You poke holes with a bone or lace them with twisted sinew and discover sleeves by accident. Quirky tanner's tidbit, every animal has just enough brain to tan its own hide, and yes, massaging brain emulsion into leather makes it soft. Smoke afterward to your head teaches it not to forget. Your wardrobe is 2 pieces deep, both in the colour earth and somehow always in style. Like joke 2, your fall collection is the same as your spring collection, but you sell it by saying limited edition. Historians still argue whether clothing becomes truly common around 100 to 200,000 years ago, hinted at by the split between head hair lice and clothing lice, or whether earlier bands already draped hides whenever nights got loud and cold. Another lively debate rides in the eye of a needle. The earliest eyed bone needles from Ice Age sites over 40,000 years old signal-tailored garments with seams and gathers, or some argue they sometimes served for net-making and basketry as much as parkas. You don't pick sides, you pick stitches that don't pop when the wind has opinions. You design by climate. In the desert you wear your shade-loose hides or bark cloth that billow so air can argue with sweat and wind. Light colours borrow sunlight and give it back. A headband turns glare into manners and keeps trickles from your eyes. In cold steppe or high plateau you reverse the fur so the soft turns in and the weather meets the guard hairs. You bind the ankles of your leggings to stop the wind from sending cold messages up your shins, and you pad your feet with dry grass inside soft shoes so the ground can think you're someone else. A strip of hide across the forehead stops heat from leaving, like a guest who didn't say goodbye. Shelter is about edges and emptiness. You carve a shallow trench to lead rain past the sleeping place like an insult you refuse to hear. You hang a flap low to the ground so warm air doesn't escape as if it has better plans. You stash a pile of stones inside to heat in the fire and tuck at the foot of your blanket. The rocks give back what the day took. A lattice of branches over your entry breaks the wind into friendly pieces. And in snow country, yes, later in your long wandering, you learn to scoop a hollow in a drift as a quick emergency nest. Air when trapped is the lightest blanket you own. Materials become accomplices. Bark peels into sheets that soften when pounded. Plant fibres twist into cords. Reeds knot into mats that roll and unroll like tame thunder. You line inner walls with grass that smells faintly of sunlight and silence. You stitch pockets into cloaks to smuggle warmth against ribs. You sew a pouch for the ever-important coal so your pocket lightning has a place to nap. Tiny lamp, a shell, or a cup of stone with a wick of twisted plant fibres floating in fat throws a little buttery halo on the cave wall. The shadows it makes of your hands look older and wiser. You decide to keep them. Mainstream historical fact bonus round on the far cold edges of the late Ice Age. People raised houses from mammoth bones on the plains of Eastern Europe and Ukraine. Rings of tusks and skulls packed with earth and hide hearths inside stores of bone outside the kind of architecture that tells you climate had teeth, and people still smiled anyway. You tuck that story into your mental toolkit, proof that even when the wind howls in mammoth humans answer in house. Life creeps into corners, so you curate the corners. You tuck food where smoke will reach it, because smoke like your ochre persuades many tiny teeth to gossip elsewhere. You shake bedding and rake embers forward in the morning, searching for scorpions who read tenancy laws too loosely. You practice door discipline, flap closed at night, flap open at morning to unroll damp and let the cave's breath turn fresh. You hang hides so wind can think for them. You thump boots to evict sand as politely as possible. Light joke 3, your housekeeping show is called Cave Makeover, and the big reveal is, no centipedes in the pillow, you're welcome. Clothing grows pockets and stories. A plaited belt carries a stone blade in a bark sheath. A little pouch holds salt scraped from a dry pan, and a few seeds you like to see again. A strip of leather wraps the wrist so a scraping tool can ride the arm and not the ground. Wet weather. You oil the cloak with melted fat so water beads like gossip it can't hold on to. Sun like a mandate. You paint the outer hide with ochre and ash, making it a little brighter to the eye and a little cooler to the touch. A wearable sunshade with a flair for drama. Insulation is choreography more than bulk. You trap air with layers instead of trusting a single heavy skin. You keep a dry set for sleep because wet steals heat like a charming thief. You sleep with tomorrow's clothes under the blanket so they wake up warm. At the fire you warm stones to tuck into a wrap. On the trail you vent and cinch because comfort is a moving target and the sweat is only useful until it isn't. If the wind sharpens, you turn your back to it and let the cloak act like a small stubborn sail that goes nowhere on purpose. Sometimes the shelter is social rather than structural. You sleep shoulder to shoulder so heat becomes communal property. Okay. You trade watch shifts so no one watches the dark alone too long. You swap cloaks when one dries faster by the fire, and everyone deserves a turn at kindness. Your camp plan assigns the elder the warmest niche, the child the least drafty spot, the snorer, the position farthest from the acoustic corner. You learn where night wind prowls at ground level and keep heads higher than ankles. The body is a chimney and you stack it intelligently. Historians still argue whether those famous hut floors at Terra Amata near Nice, dated to roughly 400,000 years ago, are true traces of frame shelters or just the clever chaos of wind and wave rearranging debris. They also spar over how widespread woven mats and baskets were before the record gets generous. Fibres rot and absence isn't evidence. You stay agnostic and practical, build what works, rebuild when it fails, move when the climate says the lease is up. Night settles like a blanket rinsed in indigo. The cave keeps the wind at arm's length. The lean-to slopes rain into a pleased puddle. Your hood shades the stars enough that sleep finds your eyelids. The fire has been banked into a red-eyed smile. Your bedding smells of grass, and a bitter leaf that discourages anything with too many legs. Your cloak holds a quiet your bones have earned. You tuck toes near warm stones, pull the edge to your chin and listen as the shelter you built edits the weather into a lullaby you can actually sleep to. You start by reading thirst from far away. On the horizon, a narrow band of deeper green threads along a dun slope reeds and sedges, telling you that water, even if buried and shy, still remembers this place. You angle toward it without hurrying, saving sweat like coin. The ground underfoot changes its grammar. Sand gives way to silt-cracked clay flakes like old paint, and the prints of hooves and padded paws converge as if they'd shared a group chat. You lower your head not to give up, but to catch the cool whisper that lives just above the ground. Animal paths are the oldest maps. Zebras carve switchbacks that avoid sink elephants, draw straight lines that forgive no bush, and the little goat hoof hieroglyphs point at slopes where trickles hide. You follow the braid of these lines to a dry riverbed, a sinuous scar of pale sand flanked by gossiping acacias. No water shows its face, which is exactly what water does when the air gets bossy. So you dig. You dig with a fire-hardened stick and your narrowing patience scooping from the lowest bend of a meander, where the sand is damp and cooler than rumour. The first handfuls collapse, then the sides begin to hold, the pit darkens, the bottom glosses. You wait, because patience is a tool, too. Mainstream historical fact in southern Africa, archaeological sites like Dip Kloof Rock Shelter, have yielded engraved ostrich eggshell fragments dated to around 60,000 years ago, widely interpreted as parts of water containers, portable canteens that could be cached or carried across dry country. Your version is unengraved and undecorated, a smooth oval you pried from a long-abandoned nest drilled at the top with a tidy flake and plugged with a cone of chewed bark. It rides your side in a sling half full, because you trust the refill you're coaxing from the ground to keep its promise. A trickle arrives the way sleep does, reluctant then generous. The little pool clouds first and then clears as sand settles. You press your lips to the cooler layer and sip not guzzle, because water carries rules the way fire carries lessons. After a drought march, you wet your mouth, wait, then wet the throat, then drink with manners, flood a tired belly, and you're paying cramps a comedy you're not casting for tonight. Like joke one, you tell your stomach, we're doing tapas, not buffet, and it rolls its eyes, but thanks you later. Plants cache rain the way caves cache night. You have names your band's own for vines that bleed clear, when nicked for Sama-like melons that bury green batteries, under the sand for succulent leaves that carry a sip hidden inside their bitterness. You test a sliver on your tongue, wait for your mouth to answer, friend or mistake, then shave thin wedges. You can lick more than chew. The palate is an older scientist than any notebook. It has kept your people out of the wrong hospital for a long time. Mornings can pay due if you invoice correctly. Before sunrise, when the air forgives everything for a few minutes, you sweep a bunch of seed heads through the grass like a soft broom and twist the gathered wet into your mouth. You spread a hide over a smooth rock the night before and peel it back at dawn, licking the edge where droplets have queued. If you're feeling extra, you mound cool stones in a little cairn under open sky. So radiative cooling works a night shift, tiny beads forming like shy pearls in the dark. Quirky tidbit, you once tied a sleeve of thin bark around a branch of broad leaves to trap the sweat of the tree itself. By midday, the parcel wept enough to wet your teeth, a plant transpiration still that isn't pretty, but gets invited back. Historians still argue whether systematic water-catching egg flasks tucked in shaded pits, routes planned around refills, social rules about who drinks first emerged widely in the Middle Stone Age, or whether the sparse, fragile evidence oversells a few special places. They also argue whether coastal foraging during dry pulses shellfish for salt and moisture was a seasonal treat or a lifeline. You let them spar in good journals, while you mark a discreet X of 4 stones in the lee of a boulder, cover an eggshell canteen with sand and a thatch of thorn, and step away without looking back, because a cache isn't a cache if you stare at it like a lost love. Birds tattle, doves commute low and straight toward the underwater wings, whispering a steady metronome. Sand grouse haul liquid in belly feathers to thirsty chicks. Follow their dawn arrow and it points to a pan that still has a memory of rain. The greater honey guide, yes. The legendary feathered partner leads your kind to beehives with an excited chatter. You weren't chasing water then, but honey turns into energy that buys you cooler hour walking, which keeps water in your bottle. Cross-credit survival is still survival. Light joke too, if you could tag the honey guide in a post you'd write collab, but the bird prefers payment in beeswax. Salt matters. Heat steals more than water. It sneaks away your minerals like a pickpocket with a charming smile. You keep a twist of burnt plant ash and a pinch of crystalline scrapings from a dry pan in your belt pouch. A lick in your hand water keeps cramps at the edge of the camp. Remember that electrolyte mix of ash and crushed seeds you carried back in section 2? It tastes like a campfire bullied a salad, but it keeps the lights on. You're not chasing a smoothie, you're chasing not passing out. Not all water is an equal friend. Stagnant pools carry invisible mouths, parasites that want to sign a long lease inside you. You let the water settle in a bark cup, pour it gently into another, so the silt stays home, and if time allows, drop in a hot stone from the fire until it hisses and the cup talks back. A rolling simmer is a lullaby you can drink. If you must move now, you add a pinch of powdered charcoal, not as a magic spell, but as a humble filter that gives grit a place to cling. The world is a maximalist. You practice subtraction. Time of day is a water skill. You do your serious miles when the sun is lazy, sweet before dawn and smug after dusk, and you turn the hateful hours into shade school, mending, plotting, teaching a child to find the green-tinted shadow at the base of a reed clump that tells of a seep underfoot. You keep your cloak loose so air can stay in the argument. You cover your head because the brain is an expensive friend. Sweat stays on the surface where the breeze can bargain it away. If the wind sulks, you make your own with an easy pace. Sometimes the land says no water, only ideas. Then you think lateral, you trail elephants the master hydrologists who will punch a well in a dry bed and drink first, leaving a cloudy generous bowl for the polite. You dig where they dug because copying the syllabus is allowed when the professor is 5 tons and persuasive. You sniff for the cool rusty breath that rises from certain cracks at midday. Air that comes from the ground instead of the sky often speaks fluent moisture. You watch ants on a hot slope. If they zip to and from at a particular root mass with unusual enthusiasm, there may be sweet liquid in a plant's hidden cupboard. Your kit evolves to respect thirst. The eggshell canteen rides in a woven reed sleeve so it doesn't bang into rock and publish your location to teeth. A bark cup nests inside a rolled mat. A tiny wad of moss lives in a pouch to serve as a filter or a sponge for teasing a sip from tight places. You keep a spare plug for the eggshell because one lost stopper is how legends about the driest walk ever are born. Light joke 3, you call that spare plug Plan Beak. When the sky blesses you, you don't just grin, you harvest. A sudden storm turns the plain into percussion. You lay hides in shallow basins, tilt your lean-to roof, and let the runoff fill anything that holds still. You dance a little because bodies do that when they stop being worried. After the rain sulks away, you tuck full shells into the shade of a dolman-sized rock and mark the cache with a signature. Only your band reads a pattern of 3 small stones and 1 turned leaf because generosity is noble and secrecy is practical. By dusk, your tongue isn't a desert anymore. Your thoughts move like streams instead of dust devils. The clay on your calves has dried into harmless armour. The ochre on your forearms cracks in little maps. The eggshell canteen clicks softly against its sling as if it approves of your route. You settle by the ember you convinced into fire earlier this evening, and you drink a small polite cup to the fact that you found water without letting your body spend itself. Tomorrow the air may wake up cruel again, but tonight sheltered, salted and steady, you own enough quiet to sleep. You move when the world blinks. First a breeze flips from hot breath to cool whisper, then dust lies down, then stars sharpen like fresh napped edges. That's your cue. You shoulder the eggshell canteen in its reed sleeve, cradle the ember bone in your pouch, and let the night's long corridor invite your feet north and east out of familiar grass along coastlines that feed at low tide through passes that only open when glaciers step back like bouncers on break. You learn that cold can be a road. When ice sheets swell, they drink the sea and lower its rim shorelines. To stride outward, islands grow together like friends who finally admitted it, and sandbars rise to whisper, "Try me." Mainstream historical fact during the last glacial maxima global sea level fell on the order of 100 metres or more, exposing continental shelves and altering coasts everywhere. Deep channels like the Wallace Line still stayed wet, but countless shallows turned into stepping stones. You don't own a map, you own ankles and timing. The shore teaches gentleness with a knife. At dawn you pry limpets, cockles and mussels from rocks with a flake, rinse them in surface and steam them in a pocket of kelp over hot stones. Springs gurgle behind dunes, fresh water hiding within a salty world. You tap the lens with a digging stick, sip plug the hole with sand and move on as if the beach and you share a secret. Light joke one, congratulations, you've invented the all-you-can-wade seafood buffet with the dress code no shoes, very much no shirt. You treat coastlines like libraries. Each cove loans you calories and asks for nothing but tidy footprints. You memorise tides by moon and wind. Spring tide, big breath. Neap tide, little sigh. You turn out at low skim the intertidal shelves and retreat upslope before the sea decides to reclaim its property with enthusiasm. Your ochre and fat skin coat, remember the desert trick, now keeps wind rash down and glare respectful. Your cloak smells less of smoke, more of salt, because survival is also wearing the weather you're in. Windows open inland too. The Sahara, so often a stern report card, sometimes blooms into grass and lakes when monsoons shift. You walk riverbeds that exist only in certain centuries, follow hippo chisel marks along banks that no one living has seen, and sip from pans where catfish stir dust into soup. Quirky tidbit in one green pulse, you pluck freshwater snails from a pond, so new it hasn't figured out its own shoreline. Steam them and carry a handful of shells as jingling weather charms there. Clack warns you when the wind jumps and your hood needs to rise. Out of Africa isn't a door you slam, it's a bead road of chances. Sometimes you step the Sinai and Levant shadowing gazelle picking pistachios that taste like shy butter, checking the sky for anvils that mean camp early. Sometimes you angle along the Red Sea's shoulders, Arabian lakes, briefly honest dune thickets ratcheting with birds, the strait at Bab el-Mandeb narrowed by low seas until it looks like a dare. Historians still argue whether the first people like you slipped across there in small watercraft, walked short island hops in a season of forgiving tides, or went the northern route first and only later met the eastern waters. Either way, you learn to read swell like handwriting and respect currents like elders. Your ember never travels alone. On coasts, driftwood is currency. Inland dwarf shrubs and dung chips keep the fire story going. You dry seaweed for tinder. You bank coals in a blasted shell when all else is wet. Smoke tastes different everywhere. Mangrove sweet, desert frank bone sharp on the step, and the flavour writes itself on your cloak. Light joke too. Your travel agent is a glacier. Your loyalty program is still warm and the room upgrade is out of the wind. Farther east, the ocean becomes a teacher with a long stick. The old world's edge is not a cliff, it's an archipelago Wallacea, strung with green beads and blue gaps. The deep water Wallace Line stays stubborn, even when seas fall, which means at some point someone in your lineage trusts wood to float and wind to assist. Maybe it's bundles of reeds, maybe a bark canoe, maybe a log raft with dreams. The crossing is short in miles and large in courage. Mainstream historical fact, second helping. By around 65,000 years ago, people are established in Sarsihul, Greater Australia, New Guinea. which implies repeated water crossing somewhere along those island chains. You launch on a dawn with a behaving wind, and a careful sky put the ember bone in a covered shell so sparks don't negotiate with waves and push. It isn't all water and beaches. Cold steppes also climb high. You follow mountain corridors because glaciers carve valleys like long generous hallways and leave moraines you can stride. Wind scrapes your cheeks until the skin learns to be oat-coloured and stubborn. You stitch for inward layer grass underfoot. Tuck heated stones into a pocket at your belly when the past turns mean. The air thins your lungs, get picky, and you slow into a 3-part dance step breath count. Step breath count. A strip of salted fat on the tongue returns fire to your blood. The world rings like a bowl when it's that clear. You time rivers, spring flood is as a moving wall, cross before it remembers to be dramatic, or after it finishes telling its story. Braidstream country demands patience. You scout a dozen glittering channels to find the one that lets you keep shins dry. Ice bridges are always both invitation and insult. You tap with a spear butt, listen and say, "Not today," more often than "why not?" You learn the etiquette of pack ice, never trust white over grey, never step where water talks underfoot, always tie yourself to someone who will laugh later, and pull now. Every long walk comes with neighbours you haven't met yet. On steppe and in forest, you sometimes find old fires in new places, hearth circles that smell faintly of resin, bones cracked in a way you recognise, red ochre smudges that say cousins. Some call them different peoples, Neanderthals under pine and snow Denisovans in high corridors, others whose names you don't hear but whose children later leave traces in you. Historians still argue whether you trade shell beads for stone blanks on a windy ridge, share songs and partners by a river turned silver under moon, or mostly avoid one another and leave marks in genes more than in memory. Your body quietly keeps receipts in the shape of tweaks, skin tuned for ultraviolet lungs happier. At altitude, immune systems with souvenirs from many biomes. Food changes costumes as the land rewrites itself. Coastal nights taste like mollusk broth and roasted rack. Steppe days like dried meat pounded with fat and ancestor to travel rations and bitter roots that learn to be useful after long boiling. Reindeer seasons teach you to follow migrations with patience and to find warmth in marrow, even when the sun has other plans. Forests hand you fungi you only half trust until elders nod and show teeth tomorrow. Light joke. 3. Your palette's tagline is, "We'll eat anything twice once carefully." The sky becomes your oldest calendar, not because you stand around doing astronomy, but because you walk under a ceiling that changes on a schedule. Certain stars rise when certain winds start. A braid of faint light, the Milky Way points toward the good paths if you align it with a notch you remember. The moon at particular swollen shapes omens particular tides. Your feet learn the measurement before your mouth finds the words. You tell time by how quick frost abandons a blade of grass when a thin sun touches it. You also learn to leave breadcrumbs the world can't eat. A napped flake tucked under a flat stone points the right gully. 3 sticks lean together. Say windbreak here. 5 say don't. A weave of reeds on a dune face marks a safe descent. You seed the trail with kindness, a little cachicle of dried shellfish in a cool crack, a plug for someone's future eggshell, a strip of bark twisted into a stopper and wedged under a rock. Plan beak for a stranger who shares your thirst. New places teach new jokes about old truths. Cold is just heat leaving. You trap it with air in fur and grass. Distance is just steps collected. You make them gentle so you can afford more. Survival is just attention worn like a cloak. You keep yours clean. The ember in the bone keeps saying yes. The coast keeps complimenting your patience. The glacier keeps minding its own slow business while you slip past its elbow. One night on a headland where the wind braids your hair into opinionated ropes, you look back. Africa is not behind you so much as in you the stride learned on savannah, the smoke language from caves, the ochre that persuaded insects and sun to be less rude. Ahead a necklace of islands glows with campfire eyes, and beyond that a continent you can't name hums like a drum under snow. You don't conquer any of it. You arrive and you keep arriving, always in the small hours when the world is polite enough to let careful feet go by. Dawn smells like salt and smoke and you lace your sandals with the quiet of someone who plans to make the sun do part of the work. Hunting in hard weather is less about heroics than choreography, pace, wind shade, and a little bit of nerve. You touch the ember bone, nudge the coals to life for a quick swallow of warm broth, smear a thin skin of ochre and fat on forearms, remember your wearable sunscreen and step off while the world is still a whisper. First move, pick a partner heat. Persistence hunting is the long con you play on a faster creature. You angle downwind, keep the antelope in view, but never spooked, and lean into the steady trot that turns your skeleton into an orchestra of Spring's arch, Achilles hip shoulder, counter-rotation. You watch the herd pick shade for panting, you do not. You keep breathing easy, a metronome that never lies. Mainstream historical fact persistence hunts have been documented among Kalahari sand peoples in modern times, where a single hunter can run prey into heat exhaustion over hours, not minutes. The trick is more patience than speed. Light joke 1, it's the world's slowest 5k, with dinner at the finish and absolutely no medal. But you don't always choose the marathon. Some days you write a short story instead of a novel. The band sketches an ambush on sand with a stick 2, wait in thorn shadow 1 loops wide to cast a moving silhouette that nudges the herd. Another posts at the only clean gap in the scrub. You measure the wind by letting a pinch of dust ghost from your fingers, or by watching how a plume of your own breath tilts when you exhale like you're telling a secret. A quick burst, a thrown shaft, and timing does what muscle alone can't. Historians still argue whether division of labour had firm lines this early, whether many hunts already split into drive and point, and whether women and older folks routinely ran the lines, or more often did the netting, snaring, and small game drives. But they agree that coordination beats lone swagger. You've got a talent that other apes simply don't, throwing far and hard. Your shoulder is a catapult with opinions, your loose waist a hinge, your long forearm a whip. With practice, a wooden spear rides a clean arc instead of a wobbly complaint. Mainstream historical fact, second helping the famous Schöningen spears from Germany straightened spruce javelins about 300,000 years old, show both woodworking skill and a balance that screams, throw me not just poke with me. Later folks will add livered spear throwers and bows, but for now your arm plus a straight shaft equals distance that turns too close into comfortable. You carry 2 1 in the hand, 1 slung. The spare is either promise or consolation. Small game is the climate's coupon, reliable, modest, often ignored, until you're hungry enough to be wise. You and the youngsters work a drive with giggles held in check. A ring of people tap brush with sticks, hiss softly and collapse the circle until hares bolt into waiting nets plated from plant fibre. Birds burst from low scrub. A quick flick with a light dart is sometimes enough, and sometimes the bird just laughs and leaves. Quirky tidbit, on long hot days you chew a sliver of a bitter cactus-like succulent to quiet hunger and thirst, an old forager's trick that makes willpower feel a bit less noble and a bit more possible. Hunting is also about listening with your eyes. You read a bent grass blade for speed and direction, a dark scuff for a stumble. You crouch to feel heat at ankle level where prey might be panting behind a dune. Your ears learn which silence is nothing nearby and which silence is everything holding still because you're the problem. You and a partner trade hand signs, wind, rock, wait, yes, no, and threads of meaning stretch between you like invisible cordage that never tangles. Light joke 2, the only sign you don't invent is again because your calves already know the choreography. When you do bring something down by perseverance, by ambush, by luck you pretend was skill, you don't hold a private party. Sharing is the climate hedge fund. The band gathers under shade, knives of flake and bone do tidy work, a cookstone warms, the ember picks its favourite corner. Liver like lightning goes first to the one whose legs wrote the day, but marrow opens for everyone. Tubers already sliced thin to detox in last night's simmer join the roast because protein without starch is a short story with a bleak ending. You parcel out portions with a memory that tracks who brought what last lean week. Historians still argue whether meat sharing grew primarily from reciprocity, you fed me then I feed you now, or from a costly signalling loop in which successful hunters earned status mates and allies by dramatic generosity. Your practice is simpler, luck is streaky. Food is smoother when you share. Tools soften the sharpness of chance. A hafted flake bound with sinew and glued with warmed pitch turns one throw into many meals by being repairable in the field. Your digging stick doubles as a probe for water, and a persuader for burrowers who forgot to lock the door. A loop snare set at a rabbit run turns night into a quiet assistant. You birdlime a branch sap thinned with heat and ash to make a lazy flycatcher that collects the day's small protein. The kit rides the plated belt under your hide cloak. Everything smells faintly of smoke, pitch, and still here. You keep predators in the plan not as enemies, but as fellow readers of the scoreboard. Vultures are your push notifications spiraling where something fell. You approach with care, trade a warning shout with hyenas who think everything belongs to them, and use your very opinionated firebrand to argue your case. You never forget that out here you are not boss, just bold. Light joke 3, you call the hyena auditor, because it always arrives during distribution and acts surprised every time. Between hunts you eat smarter, not bigger. Shellfish cycles at the shore wrap calories in salt and water. Grass seeds ground on your quern turn into travel food. Berries get mixed with the rendered fat into dense little cakes that ignore time. You dry thin sheets of meat over a rack of green twigs, smoke sneaking a protective whisper into the fibres. You tuck these odds and comforts into the pouch beside Plan Beak, the spare eggshell plug you'd rather not need because some tomorrows wake up rude. Evenings are when the social math pays dividends. Around the fire, while meat sizzles and tuber edges brown to a sweet, you feel in your molars you retell the day in low voices. The child who held the net beam gets hero billing. The older woman who spotted the faintest shadow of a track, her name loops the loudest. Jokes soften the failures. Triumphs shrink to size. Songs shape memory. Memory shapes next time. You smear a fingertip of ash on a forearm as a lazy tally of who took watch, who fetched water, who banked the ember like a pro. Tomorrow's hunt begins tonight in the way you talk. Grandmothers, the endurance athletes of experience, sit at the warmest spots. They recall which gully holds water in a dust year, when the antelope like to shadow the moon, how to vent a cloak so sweat can do its work without stealing heat later. They hand out the little rules that sound like lullabies, never run the first mile like you're someone else. Always taste the wind before you taste the trail. Share as if you'll be unlucky next week, because you will be. Whether or not scholars formalise it, you feel the grandmother effect every time a tired mother gets to eat first because an older hand rocked a baby and stoked a fire. One last debate drifts into the smoke with the sparks, whether your brain got big because hunting supplied dense predictable calories or because cooperative foraging shellfish roots small game shed widely made planning and fairness pay. Historians still argue whether hunting or gathering did more of the heavy lifting, or whether the trick was the braid of both plus fire and friendship. You pinch a tuber slice, turn a skewer, and decide the braid metaphor fits the taste of the night. The stars deepen. Fat pops from the meat and hisses like very small rain. You pass a cup from the eggshell canteen just to sip manners intact and watch heat from the hearth, write little waves on the air. Tomorrow could be a persistence day, or a net day, a small game day, or a humble shellfish day. It doesn't matter which, because the policy is the same. Hunt smart, share smarter, and let the climate believe you planned its moods. Your body keeps a ledger. The climate never audits kindly. Some days it rains meat. More often it drizzles roots and patience. You learn to turn feast into later and famine into enough. After a big kill, thank you persistence and timing, you eat with reverence and restraint. Not polite restraint. Functional restraint. Liver warms your chest. Ribs hiss over coals. Scraps simmer in a bark-bent pot until tendons forget to argue. Then you switch to preservation mode. Strips of lean hang over a rack of green twigs. Smoke writes a soft chemistry into the fibres that insects dislike and tomorrow respects. Fat melts in a shallow stone, bubbles with a smug face and becomes glue for everything pounded dried meat, crushed seeds, and a pinch of salt from a friendly pan pressed into dense cakes that ride your pouch without leaking. Light joke 1, congratulations, you've invented meal prep without the Sunday. The famine days, which are not shy, ask different skills. You pick with a flake at a dry riverbank for tubers that hoard starch like misers, slice them thin, leach their bitterness in running water, and slow roast the clean chips near the fire's calm edge. You crack old bones you cached under a cairn, remember that discreet habit, and boil splinters with hot stones in a hide-lined pit, coaxing bone grease to rise like a rumour you can eat. You peel acacia pods, grind seeds on your quern. Hello again. Paleo granola and toast the meal until the green taste walks away. If the wind is mean, you step to the shore and let limpets and small snails be honest. If the sky is kind, you nod to berries that dye your palms like they're leaving signatures. Mainstream historical fact on South Africa's southern coast sites like Pinnacle Point and Clessies River preserve early human shell middens, heaps of marine shells showing people gathering mussels and other shellfish well over 100,000 years ago. Sea level and climate put out a welcome mat at times, and your kind read it like a menu. You time low tide, pry dinner with a flake, steam it in kelp on hot stones, and take the ocean's small regular kindness over inland drama when the land is being theatrical. Insects are not a plan B, they're a plan now. Termite mounds crackle like baked clay. You poke a fire-hardened stick into a vent, shake out a rain of glossy protein and roast it in a hot pan of willow bark until it stops trying to walk away. A locust swarm shadows the evening like a flying harvest. You catch by hand, by net, by being there at the right ridiculous moment. Ant brood sorry ants becomes a buttery scoop you fold into roasted tubers. Light joke to sky meat is not a phrase you advertise, but you don't argue with the calories. Plants talk if you listen with your tongue and your elders' voices. Baobab fruit opens to chalky lemon-bright pulp that powders into a thirst-friendly drink. Mongongo or marula and other tough-shelled nuts surrender to hammerstone diplomacy. The kernels remind you that fat and patience often share a shell. You peel bark from a tree that smells like pepper and let the strips dry. Later they become flavour when the food tries to be boring. Quirky tidbit on days when a root tastes pushy, you lick a pinch of clean clay from a favourite bank geophagy because certain clays quiet certain plant toxins and calm an upset stomach. Animals do it, and your grandmother did it long before you knew the word. Not every food begins friendly. Sapnin bitter seeds need leaching, tannic nuts need soaking, gnarly tubers need pounding and heat. Some leaves want ash stirred in to nudge acids into manners. You've got procedures. Chop, soak, rinse, roast, and yes, sometimes it's a whole afternoon of why are we doing this because it turns inedible into we eat tonight. Your quern stones shine with a satiny polish from years of grinding. The odour of roasted seeds rides your cloak with smoke and salt, a travelling proof of competence. When luck yawns in your face, you brew it into interest. A pot of yesterday's starchy mash forgotten nearer the hearth goes pleasantly sour. You taste and remember that not all fermentation is a scandal. You pack cooked grains and berry pulp into a skin and hang it where cool air walks. The mix thickens into something tangy that sits lightly in a heat-sulky belly. Historians still argue whether deliberate fermentation is part of very early campcraft or a later refinement, whether your sour mash tonight is plan or accident. But either way, your gut approves the experiment, and your step tomorrow is cheaper. Season writes the menu in a hand you've learned to trace. Rain turns the plain generous with mushrooms you test in slivers. Dry months push you to rivers, coasts, and the underground stores. Spring is eggs on cliff shelves, seabirds scolding you, apologising with your eyes and leaving half. Late summer is fruit bruising underfoot. You boil it down, dry it on flat stones, and pry it off in leathery sheets with a proud flourish. Winter cold when you chase corridors near ice lets meat keep longer. You build snow larders that foxes admire but cannot open when you pick the right ledge. Feasts arrive on strange schedules. A stranded whale makes a coastline into a semester of abundance, fat like candle wax meat in sheep's bones that become tools and scaffolds. You rush the first days to take what you can before teeth with no respect for your plans arrive. You render barrels of grease in stone-lined pits, dip dried meat into it, and seal it with more fat until the package shines. Hyenas the auditors swing by. Your very opinionated firebrand argues placement. Sharing with neighbouring bands becomes both generosity and insurance for the day your luck sits down with its arms crossed. Light joke 3, you call it paleo potluck, but nobody brings a salad. Not all days get headlines. Many a steady dig steam grind sip. Repeat the quiet choreography that turns landscape into blood sugar without asking the weather to clap. You teach children to spot the greener halo around a plant that hides water, to look for a certain crispness in the shadow under a reed clump that means a seep, to recognise the faint glitter of fish in an oxbow when the main river sulks. You show them the safest colour of clay, to taste the right scent of a tuber when it's done, for giving you the sound a nut makes when it's all kernel and no disappointment. Storage is a verb, not a place. You cache eggshell flasks, remember. Plan beak for spare stoppers in the shade of a friendly boulder, and mark the spot so only your people can hear the hint. You dry meat as thin as skin under a thatch awning where air flows but sun doesn't bully. You line a pit with woven mats and coals lay in wrapped roots, and seal it with packed earth and a pattern of stones that reads as ours to you, and rocks to everyone else. You hang braided fish in the smoke lane of the shelter. You tuck nuts in a lidded basket that used to be a patch of reeds. Your mouth tells the weather what to do with you. Salt and water return cramps to exile. Fat tells your liver you're friends. Starch keeps the brain from narrating doom during long walks. Protein repairs. Too much without fat and starch nags your kidneys. You learn that hunger has different accents: salt hunger, water hunger, fat hunger, and you answer each in its own grammar. Some nights stew answers all three with a modest bow. The debates that swirl in far-off rooms someday about whether big game or small land or sea plants or meat pulled your lineage through bad centuries would make you smile. Historians still argue whether coastal shellfish-rich diets acted as climate refuges that launched migrations, or whether flexible inland foraging routes, nuts, small game, was always the core, and the coast just a seasonal romance. You don't publish, you practice. And practice looks like walking between biomes and not pretending loyalty to any single menu. By lamplight, okay, a scallop of stone with a wick of plant fibre and fat you eat, slow wipe your mouth with the back of your arm painted in faded ochre sunscreen and count your kindnesses. There's a grease cake tucked for tomorrow, a pouch of ground seeds sweetened with a smear of honey. The honey guide earned cloud of the year, a string of dried fish clinking like flat bells and a calm ember in its bone cradle waiting to be breakfast. You're not winning against feast or famine, you're smoothing it, teaching it to take smaller steps so your heart can take bigger ones. The fire settles into red eyes. The wind proofreads the shelter and accepts your edits. Your belly is not full the way feasts claim fullness, but it is convinced. You lie down on grass, bedding that remembers your shape, pull a hug that still smells faintly of smoke and seed, and let your body fold around the steady answer you've built. On a planet that doesn't apologise, you have become flexible enough not to need one. You draw a map in dust with one finger, and then walk it into your bones. The riverline squiggles, the windrose is a flower with only 4 petals, and the stars are dots you don't so much copy as remember. You've learnt that landscapes speak several languages at once, sand shadow tracks smell, and your job is to translate before thirst or cold asks the same question louder. You put your back to the first light, watch your shadow stretch like a polite guide, and let the morning tell you where it stored last night's cool air. Tracks are clocks, if you ask nicely. A crisp rim on a hoof print means minutes. A collapsed edge says hours. A dusting of chaff inside a pad mark says the wind has been meddling. You kneel, pinch the crumbled lip, and feel whether it still remembers moisture. A hair snagged on the thorn tells both direction and urgency, the twist in its curl points with yesterday's breeze. You follow not just prints, but their grammar long, even spacing means travelling. Broken rhythm around a bush means browsing. The circle with a pause is where a watcher stared back at you without you being there. Light joke. Call that pose antelope selfie and know you don't like your angle. Wind leaves punctuation on water and grass. You read cat's paws skittering across a pan. Dark patches racing like playful shadows, and adjust your route to keep a quartering breeze on your cheek, the better to carry your scent backward to nobody. Midday thermals lift vultures into lazy spirals. You file their corkscrews under news I may need later. Dune slip faces point leeward. Ripple crests on sand line up like soldiers who all like the same direction. On the steppe, grass combs over in a single sweep. In a gorge it whirls and stands back up, warning you the wind here is a trickster, with pockets full of surprises. When clouds start writing in capital letters, you pace your day. You've learned the meanings. Anvil tops mean thunder farms. Ragged grey mares galloping low mean squalls with bad manners. Virga rain that falls and vanishes means dry air above is still in charge. You hide from lightning by refusing to be tall. You hide from flash floods by refusing to sleep where the ground narrows into a sentence with only one ending. Your mental map isn't flat, it's layered with weather season and luck, and you revise it like a poet who knows a harsh editor called climate. Time rides the horizon. You plant a short stick and watch the shadows arc. When it shortens to the least fussy version of itself, you're standing near the day's hinge. East is where the sun stood up. West is where it will lie down. North and south fall out of that like honest change from a good trade. At dawn and dusk, the sun rises and sets a little differently, each week creeping along the horizon as the year leans. You mark the extreme points with a cairn or a memory turning sky drift into a calendar your feet can use. Mainstream historical fact: many indigenous navigators encode wayfinding and seasonal knowledge in songs and stories. Australian songlines are a well-documented example where verses recite landmarks, waterholes and directions so precisely that singing them is a kind of walking map. You have your own quieter verses lists of stones and smells that keep you between generosity and danger. Night, of course, is an atlas you can carry without hands. You don't need charts to know that certain stars keep honest paths. At lower latitudes, you watch the belt of Orion tilt through seasons like a friendly door on a loose hinge. Farther north, a steady star near the sky's axle, what later folks will call Polaris, stays mostly put and tells you which way the world is pretending not to move. In the south, there's no bright pin, but the Southern Cross points like a reliable finger, if you know how far to extend the line. You mark rising and setting places of bright stars against the teeth of the hills. If a mountain wears a star at its left horn, you're on time. If the jewel sits at the right, you're late. Light joke too, if the sky were an app, you'd turn off push notifications and keep the widget clean quiet, always there. Animals loan you compasses. In some stretches of Australia, tall, thin termite mounds grow with eerie precision, as if a surveyor walked by many a line north-south to manage heat inside their thin edges, catching dawn and dusk while the broad faces dodge noon. Quirky tidbits stand among those magnetic mounds, and you can roughly feel the world's spine without a needle or a magnet, just a field of earthen obelisks voting the same direction. On plains elsewhere ant trails favour leeward routes. On coasts, terns fly like clock hands between rookeries and tide lines. In forests, moss fattens on the side that gets more mist, which is helpful only if you've already learned the forest logic and don't fall for easy myths. You count in notches and breath, not numbers in rows. A rib bone with little cuts becomes a pocket memory of days since rain, or of how many camps it takes to reach a pass, or of when a moon will be fat enough to trust a night walk to the next water. Historians still argue whether the famous notched bones, the Lebombo or Ashango bones for instance, are lunas, calendars, tally sticks, or simple recorders of something happened this many times. You listen to that debate drift on a future wind and smile. For you a notch is a promise you won't forget by morning, and that's plenty mathematics for a thirsty week. Your route gets braided with stories so you can remember it when the world looks different under snow or dust. A boulder that resembles a sleeping hippo becomes keep it on your left cheek. A notch in a ridge becomes the tooth with a star, and a spring that smells like pennies becomes red water with a shy taste. Your people sing these references at dusk until the children can walk them with their eyes closed. The ember bone yes still intravilling becomes a chorus line in those songs turn when the coal goes quiet is code for where the wind falls out stop for the night. The jokes in the verses are memory handles. You deliberately make them funny because a laugh sticks better than a lecture. Wayfinding also means minding other minds. You map where the hyena auditors like to patrol downwind edges of your usual carcass fields, where leopards write silent signatures on low branches, where elephants prefer to punch wells in a dry bed. You don't just track animals, you track their schedules. Dawn is for cats heading home heavy. Midday is for ungulates sighing in shade. Evening is for winged things swapping day shifts for night. Your calendar is a circle drawn over a circle, the round of a day inside the round of a season. Light joke 3, you call it calendar integration, and yes, your only subscription fee is calories. When paths fork, you consult the inventory in your head. How much water in the eggshell in its reed sleeve, how much fat in the pouch, whether your last tuber stash is still in that pit, lined with reeds and embers and marked with 3 stones and 1 leaf your band's private punctuation. You read the sky for how many nights will the moon offer music the wind, for will smoke behave and your calves, for are we the persistence hunters tomorrow, or the patient shellfishers? You never decide with pride, you decide with probabilities, which is just a fancy word for respect. You also build outward memory, little edits to the land that help tomorrow, you or cousin you. A line of 3 small cairns bending left says, good passage in flood. A fan of sticks leaned under a rock overhang says, there's a coal bed here if rain throws a tantrum. You never mark water with honesty a stranger can read. Generosity is a virtue and a luxury, and some seasons do not offer luxuries. But you'll leave a spare stopper plan beak wedged near a favoured eggshell cache, because if kindness is cheap and might come back, why not pay it forward to your own ankles in a different month? Under a moon that just cleared the thorn tips, you pause on a ridge and rehearse your map one last time. River, like a long question mark, dune field, like combed hair, termite compass standing tall. The belt of stars angled like a friendly door, the notch in that far ridge with a bright point resting on its tooth. Tomorrow you'll walk those lines into reality the way you have since the first ember learned your name. You don't conquer space, you befriend pattern, and pattern carries you where food and mercy overlap. At a spring that smells faintly of copper, you find footprints that are not yours. The toes splay wider, the heel digs deeper, and the stride writes a different grammar, shorter, heavier, confident as stone. You lift your head and see smoke rising where the cliff folds into itself. You do not point, you breathe, once taste the air for the ash note, and feel the old rules settle on your shoulders. Neighbours first, labels later. You edge along the rock in the ordinary way, no sudden opinions, no silhouettes on the skyline. And there they are in the windbreak, stocky, thick forearmed people tending a small polite fire hides, trimmed clothes faces, broad under heavy brow ridges, hair lying like dark moss. They move with cold country economy, no wasted gesture. In winter corridors, bodies often listen to Bergman and Allen without knowing their names, wide trunks for heat shorter limbs that don't squander warmth on distance. You feel your own lanky desert geometry and tug your cloak a little tighter, because climates make cousins out of strangers and also rivals. Light joke one, you hear your grandmother whisper. Be nice. These folks could deadlift your shelter. You show your hands empty. You hold a flake by the dull edge so the glitter cannot pretend to be an insult. You point to your water gourd, then to the spring. Heads turn. No one growls. No one smiles. You move like you're on loan. A child peeks from behind a knee the way jackal pups peer from dens. You kneel, fill the eggshell canteen, and leave a thin strip of dried meat on a rock payment gift or bribe. You don't say which. Mainstream historical fact much later when bones tell their secrets, people will learn that non-African modern humans carry about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA, a receipt that some meetings were more than cautious drinks. You don't carry percentages, you carry etiquette. The days that follow are a choreography of almosts. Your band and theirs use the same valley but different hours. You hunt the East Ridge while they patrol the West. Sometimes you pass at distance, raising a palm in a greeting that might also be a boundary. Sometimes you trade without words, a core that flings beautiful flakes for a length of sinew cord that makes any spear steadier. Obsidian shows up in the wrong geology black glass from far away, and it rides with the stocky neighbours more often than with you, proof that someone trades over distances you haven't walked this season. You start to recognise their favourite pigments, manganese as black as midnight rubbed on a scraper red ochre, so rich it glows like sunset under the fingernails. Quirky tidbits, some of their people favour a soft charcoal called manganese dioxide that when powdered and blown into embers coaxes flame to wake faster than dry sticks alone. It smells like chemistry leaning over your shoulder and nodding. Hunting days grow into study days. You watch them slip into a snow-brushed gully and vanish like muscle into fur. There you think watch you do the long boring magic, your heat puppet persistence trot until an antelope's breath loses the argument with its legs. You learn their sign for wind, 2 fingers fluttered at the chin, and they learn yours for cat, a hook of the hand, and a stillness that means now. Historians still argue whether language capacity differed much between your kinds, whether their speech was different in sound but not in scope, or whether the gap mattered for alliances and trade. You don't grade their sentences, you read their intentions, which are usually share the valley, Don't be foolish, watch the sky. Not all meetings rest easy. A day comes with a ribcage already opened by teeth and 2 hyenas laughing like critics. You and one of them, a man with forearms like small trees, arrive at the same moment. There is a heartbeat of mirror stance, both of you with brand sticks, both of you calculating how much marrow and how much trouble. Then the auditor's hyenas as always push the decision. You both shout, jab and drive teeth backward, and in that ridiculous perfect second you are allies, not storybook enemies. When the hyenas sulk off, you hack opposite ends of the same femur, glance up once and then step away with your shares. Light joke too. You will later tell your fire that you did cross-cultural team building. The fire, being wise, will not laugh. Nights fill with new theories. Around your embers you test the idea that they sleep pressed to the cave wall for warmth and set their hearth low, that they bank fire with a technique you haven't mastered, that their spear balance favours close throws into brush while yours likes open-air arcs. One morning you find a pile of broken eagle talons strung with sinew-curved ivory claws polished where finger and feather once were. Maybe jewellery, maybe ceremony, maybe just someone keeping handsome trash. The child in your band threads one onto a wrist thong and invents a rule: if it ticks on a rock while walking there's someone behind you. Even trinkets can moonlight as tools. Rain weeks, famine weeks, snow weeks, melt weeks. In each you share a landscape and learn tiny pieces of each other's genius. You copy their habit of scoring a spear shaft to fit the grip when gloves of frozen hide make palms clumsy. They copy your trick of warming a stone in the fire and dropping it into a bark cup to make a quick boil without a proper pot. You see one of them smear their skin with ash and fat in a pattern you recognise from your own ochre sunscreen. Remember that desert vanity. The idea has crossed the valley and decided to live in 2 houses. You carry on with your plan beak egg stopper, and one late afternoon you see a familiar spare plug tucked under their cairn too. Kindness migrates. On other frontiers, other cousins leave softer marks. In a high corridor where breath feels expensive, you meet a small caravan of rumours, stories of people with wide faces and quiet feet whose home is seldom lower than the cloud's knees. They look like twilight move like mountain goats and keep fires that seem reluctant to smoke. You do not share a language, but you share a hill and a horizon. Later, long after dusk and scholars get involved, someone will point to a gene called APOS1, an altitude adaptation running high in Tibetans, and say it likely rode in from an archaic people we call Denisovans. For you the fact is simpler. You felt less sick climbing with a band that knew which passes steal headaches and which ones loan you lungs. Genes keep their own travel diaries. Bits of immune system HLA markers that stand guard at the borders of your cells bear patterns that suggest donations from neighbours who had already wrestled with the parasites of a place. Cold tolerance tweaks hitchhike with children through seasons of snow, handing out advantages where wind bites. Skin pigmentation alleles juggle sunlight and folate and vitamin D as if they were 3 hot coals. In high UV corridors, bodies stay dark as good advice. In low UV winters, some lines pale to let scarce light do its work. You don't recite the names, you wear the results. Like joke 3, you describe the process to a sleepy child as borrowing each other's best tricks, and the child says, like when we swapped cloaks by the fire, which is exactly right and also glorious. The harsh truth underneath all this neighbourliness is that scarcity trims patience. A frozen spring turns courtesy into math. An abundance of coastal shellfish makes even awkward neighbours tolerable. A failed migration makes everyone's voice lower and their brands stand nearer. Historians still argue whether competition drove them away, diseases you carried hurt them, climates shuffled the deck too fast, or all 3. Whether your kind had a social web that stretched wider and absorbed shocks they could not. Whether the difference was poetry in your head or calories in your pot. You hold none of that in your hand tonight. You hold an eagle talon with a shiny worn groove and a spear with 2 repair wraps, and you hold your brand where the fire can keep it sure. On a night when snow practices in the clouds and the wind has a new vocabulary, you sit in a cave mouth not yours, and share a stew not entirely theirs. Meat tubers, a pinch of sour mash from yesterday, accidental fermentation turned affectionate, and a handful of ground seeds softening the edges. Someone gestures at the stars, draws a short story with a finger on the hearth. Floor, ridge spring-safe place to sleep if the flood comes early. You nod and add a tiny X of 3 pebbles and a leaf your band's punctuation. For a breath, you are many kinds of humans making one quiet map. Dawn will separate the bands again. You'll follow the antelope and the cat calendar. They'll test the gorge and the goat schedule. You'll look for their boot-wide prints in the mud when you wonder if the pass is open. They'll glance for your long-heeled steps when they want a hint about where shellfish kept their promises. The gene receipts will keep piling subtle interest in the background. The tools will keep swapping ideas under everyone's noses. The fire will keep telling anyone who sits politely that warmth is a shared language. You pack the eggshell check, the spare stopper, touch the talon on your wrist where it ticks softly, and step into a day that is yours, and also just slightly theirs. It starts with an itch you didn't invite. Midges write their tiny cursive along your ankles, and a mosquito practices the world's rudest lullaby near your ear. You answer with chemistry and choreography. A smudge fire puffs under the windbreak punky wood, and a braid of sharp-scented leaves you learned from a grandmother who could keep a camp bug philosophical with one hand. You paint a thin skin of ash and fat on the bite zones. Yes, the same ash that polishes pots and teeth. Remember your first soap, and the alkaline grit makes your skin a less exciting restaurant. Light joke 1, your skincare line is called Eau de Campfire, and the only influencer deal is with your own immune system. Smoke is your first clinic. You hang bedding in its lane where the grey curls drift. Nits and little crawlers decide to move out without leaving a note. You roll a hide slowly over embers, careful not to singe, just enough heat to make fleas mistake ambition for a bad career choice. You thread a wick of dry dung into the coals so it smoulders steady. Not glamorous, but mosquitoes dislike the resume, and tuck the ember bone still travelling, still loyal deeper, so the fire doesn't get ideas about wandering. Hides nets the inside of your cloak. Everything gets a turn in the smoke. It's a ward against bites, a preservative for meat, a perfume that tells predators you mean business, and a bedtime story for lungs that yes will grumble later. Food becomes medicine the moment you boss it around with heat. You simmer shellfish until shells yawn and parasites lose their lease. Tubers that would have scalded your gut get sliced, leached and roasted into good citizens. Bones donate grease to a pot where hot stones crowd each other like old friends. The rolling boil talks germs into leaving. Mainstream historical fact, long before towns and livestock crowds, people still carried worms. Coprolites from ancient camps and caves on multiple continents keep turning up whipworm and roundworm eggs, proof that parasites were old roommates, and cooking, leaching and boiling are exactly how you evict some of them without seeing them. You don't name the species, you watch the belly stop arguing. Your water rules tighten when heat hits hard. You let sand settle, you pour gently, you drop in a fire-warmed stone until the bark cup hisses, you cool it under a leaf. A pinch of powdered charcoal turns your cup into a humble filter and a stomach soother on days when the river smelled like gossip. Geophagy, the careful lick of clean clay from a bank you trust, remember that trick from famine days, calms tannins and certain alkaloids when a plant comes with personality. You don't call it detox, you call it make dinner friendly. Plants whisper remedies if you ask politely. The inner bark of willow talks to your pounding head in a language of bitter comfort. Chewed leaves from a feathery aromatic plant whisper to fever the way a lullaby persuades a baby. A string of seeds threaded and worn against skin doesn't do anything magical, but the smell reminds you to breathe slower. Honey earns more than sweetness packed on small cuts under a leaf wrap. It keeps flies out and edges clean. Your thanks go to the Honey Guide Best Collab partner, and to bees who do the real pharmacy. Quirky tidbit termites gift a clay so sterile and tightly packed that a smear of damp mound mud makes a decent keep-it-clean paste over a scrape until you can wash. Amazing what tiny masons can do when they live inside an air-conditioned dirt cathedral. Crowding is your uninvited pathogen party. When shellfish run thick, or a migration pulls many bands to one generous waterhole camp, geometry tightens fires shoulder to shoulder, laughter braided trades quick. That's when lice hitch rides between cloaks, you remember, when clothing invited that particular roommate coughs pass along the sleeping circle and stomach bugs test their social skills. You answer with layout, the latrine moves downwind and downhill, from water a shallow trench you ash over. After each visit your sign reads invisibly, do not feed the river. Cooking pits skirt the clean stream. Water-drawing paths are different from waste paths. Bedding gets morning sun and midday smoke. Light joke 2. It's the original festival hygiene plan. One entrance, many exits. Please wash your hands in ash. You also practice soft isolation without calling it that. A cough that lingers earns a sleeping spot closer to the door, where air changes its mind more often. Fever sleeps near warm stones, but downwind of the main circle. A dot of ochre on the wrist signals, "Let me rest," a quiet tag that saves breath on explanations. You pass sips from the eggshell canteen with manners wipe the lip with a leaf, and refill from a pot that is actually boiled instead of a one that just bragged about it. Teeth tell on you, so you bribe them with care. You pick with a sliver of bone those tiny grooves in old teeth prove you're not alone in that habit. You rub ash and a pinch of salt across gums. You chew a twig until its fibres make a little brush and let the bark's bitterness remind your mouth to behave. You don't know words like calculus, but the tart mineral crust that sometimes builds on teeth holds tiny records pollen, moke the ghost of plant resins. Later clever people will claim they see hints of medicinals in that record bark's bitters. Perhaps even a friendly mould on someone's meal, and you'll just nod as if to say, of course we nibble what helps. Historians still argue whether deep crowd-loving diseases, measles, smallpox, influenza, wait for big villages and animal herds arriving with barns and grain, or whether a few of their ancestors sampled your camps in quieter forms. They also debate tuberculosis's timing, whether it shadowed hunter-gatherers at low levels, or burst into flames later with cattle and close quarters. You don't settle their journals. You settle your camp fewer bodies per windbreak when you can smoke where it helps more than it harms, and fires spaced so sparks don't overshare while warmth does. Bugs that bite from the outside get their own playbook. You comb hair with a bone pick crack, knits with nail and patience and butter, bite rings with fat and ash, so they're less interesting to scratch. Ticks are a two-hand operation, thumb and nail, and a smear of resin after eviction. Leeches are rude but honest. A pinch of salt sends them packing, a clean wash sends their germs away too. You smoke sleeping niches, shake grass, bedding, hard and refresh mattress layers with that bitter insect unfriendly leaf you learned back at the cave, Sibidoo, wisdom paying rent. Air has to be a friend as well as a cloak. On still nights you crack the shelter high and low to let the smoke thread out instead of pool in shoulders and lungs. On windy ones you lower the flap so the fire doesn't write you into its cautionary tale. You're not collecting a cough as a souvenir. Children carry the brand on watch far from faces and learn that a little smoke keeps mosquitoes philosophical while too much turns lungs into grumpy uncles. Balance is the job. When the gut grumbles anyway, you go gentle. Thin broth first bone bright and salted with ash, pinch, then a mash of roasted tuber. When the belly stops narrating its woes, you rest calves that were planning a proud long walk. You trade hunts for netting or shellfish. You get stubborn about shade. Grandmothers murmur the list, sip salt, sleep sunlight on the bedding. Smoke, the corners ash the latrine. This isn't magic, it's manners with microbes. Crossband days swap more than tools. You learn a neighbour's trick of rubbing fat mixed with crushed aromatic leaves inside the collar, and cuffs, where fleas like to start their tours. You teach your Planbeak habit, always carry a spare stopper, so no one shares a canteen because a plug got lost at the worst moment. Around the stew you compare rashes, laugh the fear down to a size you can carry, and agree that honey makes even medicine behave. Light joke 3. If you invented a spa day out here, it would be a smoke sauna, an ash scrub, a honey mask, and a willow bark tea. 5 stars would recommend to a friend with bites. By night the camp is a low constellation, each fire a little sun with ideas about health. Bedding breathes hung in smoke, the latrine hushes under ash. The pot simmers the last gilt out of a stubborn tuber. Your wrist smells faintly of resin, your ankles of bitter leaves, your whole self of wood smoke and relief. You bank the ember until it purrs, draw your cloak over shoulders that remember cold and fevers and nights of rest, and you listen as the wind tests the edges of the shelter and decides you've done enough for one day. Tomorrow the insects will file new complaints and the gut bugs will try to unionize. You'll answer with fire leaves, ash patience, and a band that keeps watch when you can't. Dusk leans over your shoulder and everyone drifts toward the same orange grammar. The ember bone gets promoted to fire again. Smoke climbs the cave mouth like a slow prayer. The circle arranges itself by the habit elders in the warmth, children at the edge where shadows can still be animals if a story needs them to be. You smear a thumb of red ochre on your forearm. Same ochre and fat paste that kept insects philosophical and sunless rude. And this time it isn't sunscreen so much as punctuation tonight. We mean something together. The first ritual is ordinary kindness shaped into rule. A strip of dried meat goes to the runner whose lungs bought it. A warm stone slides into an elder's lap. The eggshell canteen makes a round, and each mouth leaves enough for the next. You learned long ago that if you want to eat in lean months, you celebrate sharing in fat ones. You hum as bowls pass no proper melody, just the band's heartbeat bringing the pot to a simmer. Light joke one, call it the religion of snacks do unto others as you would have them bring you seconds. Songs build the map you can't carry in your hands. A soft chant runs through the names of springs and passes. Remember the tooth in the ridge that holds a star on its left horn. Little verses encode latrine downwind, firebrand within reach. Plan beak, spare stopper under the flat stone by the dolmen-sized boulder. Mainstream historical fact in more recent times, Australian songlines record roots, waterholes and duties as melody. You practice your own version, turning chores and coordinates into phrases that travel well in the mouth. A child echoes the last word of each line like a punctuation to a mark, and that echo is how tomorrow's feet will remember where to turn. Paint draws breath where words can't. You spit primed a smooth patch of cave wall earlier. Now you lay a hand on it and blow ochre through a hollow reed until a negative halo remains your absence rendered as presence. Far away and long before anyone calls it art, people press palms and spray pigment on rock hand stencils in Sulawesi and El Castillo, measure older than 40,000 years. At Blombos engraved ochre and string after string of ostrich eggshell beads whisper that symbol and body have been flirting for at least 75 millennia. You paint in that company even if you don't know their names. Quirky tidbit, you crush a shimmer of mica into the red. By firelight your skin glints like embers decided to become freckles. Stories set boundaries without fences. You tell the one about the boy who stole water from a cache and found hyena auditors. Waiting hyenas appear as union reps in all the good tales. You tell the one about the woman who left no plan beak and had to share a stranger's sip kindness returned, because kindness travelled first. You tell the one where the honey guide, proud of the collab, led a greedy man to a hive, and then called in stinging reinforcements because the man forgot to leave wax. There's laughter at the exact places where the rules are sharpest. Jokes make memory stick, memory makes tomorrow safer. Someone lifts a bone flute from a pouch of vulture's wing bone hollowed with holes by patience and a flake and lets a thin row of notes walk into the dark. Mainstream historical fact bonus tune bone and ivory flutes from the Swabian caves in Germany. Hohlefels-Geissen Klosterler date to around 35 to 40,000 years ago. Whether yours would pass inspection there, who knows? To your circle, this one is the exact shape of quiet. Rhythm follows heel taps on a flat rock drum, knuckles flick a gourd that doubles as a canteen when not being a rattle voices braid. Light joke too, your band name is the Smouldering Brands and your first single is Don't Sleep in the Wash. There are rituals for wrong days too. When cough holds on, you smear a quiet stripe of ash along the wrist, the camp's sign for let me rest. Handle my watch, and the circle shifts to cover. When luck breaks in the hunt, you chalk a white line of crushed shell along a spear shaft, not magic exactly, but a promise to aim, truer and throw only when the wind says yes. When someone's temper tries to become weather, the grandmother whose memory smells like willow bark invites them to fetch water and the path out and back bleeds heat from the anger, so the circle doesn't have to. Death gets ceremony because the living need a map through it. You rub a little ochre on the brow of the still face, lay a few beads. Eggshell rings threaded on sinew against the chest, and tuck a favourite flake in the hand so it doesn't feel naked. You choose a spot the flood won't argue with and the animals will pass by, not through. Mainstream historical fact last for tonight promise some burials in the Levant Mosul and Kafze, bear red ochre and grave goods over 90 to 100,000 years ago. Later Neanderthal graves like Shanidar appear to show care and placement. though the famous flower burial is debated. Historians still argue whether pollen there came from bouquets placed by mourners, or burrowing rodents hauling some spring into the grave. Your people just keep their funerals tidy and their memories long. You return to the circle with smoke in your hair and a softness in your voice, because grief is a weather you move through, not a place you pitch a tent. Between fires you make small holy messes. Beads clack against wrist bones as you grind seeds on the quern. A little eagle talon remember that neighbour's gift ticks on rock your accidental alarm for being followed. You mark a child's height on a cave wall beside the hand stencils, not to worship growth, but to remind yourselves that time is a thing you can look at and smile. You hang a bundle of charms in the windbreak, a fishbone for good water, a twist of resin for stubborn tools, a shell for the sea's good mood. Magic. Maybe. Practice definitely. The rules your myths enforce are suspiciously practical. Don't take all the eggs when the cliff shouts and birds wheel, leave half so the story can continue. Never sleep in the wash, even if the sand is soft. Flash floods don't read apologies. Share first cut with the runner and first sip with the fevered lucky legs, and clear heads keep everyone fed. You circle those rules with rhymes and glitter because bare instructions taste like sand and stories taste like dates dipped in fat. Like to joke 3. If you ever carve commandments, they'll start with "Thou shalt not anger the auditors," because hyenas have very sharp pens. Rituals travel with you, because the climate does. In the desert you draw a line of ochre around the camp so the sun knows where not to step. On the coast you sing the tide song before low-water shellfish rounds. In the cold you knock spears against the doorframe twice to wake the wood and your hands in the same breath. The ember bone keeps its VIP seat. The first breath into it is a thank you. The last breath at night is a promise. You do not mistake your ceremonies for levers on the weather, you mistake them for memory aids, morale boosts and group contracts you sign with smoke. Historians still argue whether symbolic behaviour blooms in sudden fireworks, an upper Paleolithic revolution, or flowers slowly and unevenly across continents and centuries, showing up early at Blombos and late somewhere else, strong in one valley and shy in the next. They debate whether Neanderthals painted caves deep as the heart and strung talons because art or because they liked pretty noise on the wrist. You listen to the arguments ride the wind from a future you won't meet, and you stir the pot so it doesn't catch. Either way, your circle sits closer when the paint comes out, and people do difficult favours for one another right after you sing. Tonight's final act is small and perfect. A child asks for the story of the ember that never died. You tell it the same way your voice learned it, a coal in a bone carried through rains and across sands banked under ash, that remembered the exact weight of your palm kept alive by a string of breaths that were never the same person twice. Somewhere in that story the child falls asleep and the circle relaxes another notch. The paint dries on your hands, the flute goes back in its pouch, the star on the ridge tooth slides a finger's width west. You bank the coals into a red-eyed smile. The moral glue sets while nobody's looking. And the weather, which runs ruthlessly on its own schedule, has to admit that cooperation keeps sneaking under its door with warm feet. You stop treating weather like a boss and start editing it with small repeatable tricks. Fire becomes your quiet pen. You burn brush in the cool season. Nothing theatrical, just low crawling flames that lick old grass and leave black lacework behind. After a week, the ash writes a green alphabet. Young shoots pop tubers, fat and sweeter ticks dislike the cleared lanes and game shows up to eat where you can see it. You walk the mosaic, burned, unburned, burned, like a chessboard. You set for both food and fire breaks. Mainstream historical fact, many indigenous peoples have long used controlled low-intensity burning to shape patchy habitats, encouraging fresh growth for animals and people alike, and reducing the risk of big angry wildfires. You copy that wisdom without citing anyone. Your bibliography is the grass. Not every burn is for dinner. Some are for moving. A narrow, cool fire ahead of you gentles thorns and turns ankle traps into polite stubble. Smoke doubles as a signal tower. A thin column on a far ridge can mean safe spring open or hyena auditors loitering, depends on the agreed code. Yes, the auditors still audit. They love a cookout they didn't organise. Light joke 1, your calendar workshop. is charcoal on grass and your push notifications smell like barbecue. Water gets engineering too. You shade a shallow pit with a hide propped on sticks, edges low to coax breeze. Evaporation works for you instead of against you. The air licks water away from the hide and the pit sweats a little cool back. Nights with a cooperative sky, you spread a stone leaf under the open air so radiative cooling kisses dew onto its face. In the morning you wipe it with a twist of grass. You roof small springs with lattices of reeds and thorn, just enough cover to cut the sun's greed and the animal's curiosity, not enough to be a trap. Remember Plan Beak, your spare eggshell stopper. A cluster of them rides your pouch because one lost plug turns a clever cache into a sad story the wind has to finish. On coasts where tides keep honest hours, you lay stones into a V whose mouth faces the sea. At low tide the V is just sculpture. At high tide the ocean wanders in and then on its way out hesitates. Fish funnel toward the point and find woven baskets waiting reed throats that invite and do not explain exits. You steam the catch in kelp over hot stones and purse your lips in a modest way that says engineering. Historians still argue whether massive stonefish weirs came mostly with larger Holocene populations, or whether smaller, humbler versions like yours thread farther back. Either way, tides are employees you hire by the moon. Light joke 2. Congratulations, you've opened a pop-up seafood restaurant with a very strict dress code, bare feet. Rivers want in on the contract. You stake a brush fence partway across a narrow riffle, leaving a gap that points to your basket like an arrow pretending to be water. In flood season, you undo the lattice, so it doesn't go pinwheeling away. In dry weeks, you rebuild with a tighter weave. A pinch of crushed soapy root rubbed between palms tells you when the rinse runs clear, good enough to wash your hands, not to season the pool. Yes, some plants can stun fish. No, you don't foul the same drinking hole you sing about in your songline. Storage moves from hide it to shape the room. In cold seasons, you scrape a pit into the north-facing foot of a slope line, it with flat stones and a quilt of dry grass laid in bundles of meat, dipped in rendered fat, then cap with a mat, a lid of earth, and a quiet signature of 3 stones and 1 leaf. In warm places, you char the pit, first coals and sand to bake the walls so the earth smells a little smoked instead of damp. Fat gets its own vault melted and strained through a wad of grass poured into a clean stomach bag, sealed with a laced thong, then hung, where smoke writes a lazy halo. You've made a room where weather knocks, and you answer, leave a message. Shelter 2 becomes a machine with opinions. On windy flats, you dig your floor down a forearm's depth and build up the rim with turf and brush, a pit house with shoulders. The door faces away from the tantrum wind. A low-lidded vent sneaks air to the fire, so smoke has a reason to go somewhere that is not your eyes. You raise a reflector wall of stone behind the hearth. The rock heats and regifts warmth all night. Warm stones wrapped in hide go under bedding at dusk. At dawn they remember you kindly. In snow country you bank drifts into a crescent windbreak around the lean-to. Snow sinters into a polite wall if you pat it like a sleepy dog. In desert suns you double, roof a thatch canopy above an air gap, then your hide shade overshade the oldest insulation hack. You begin to aim the camp at the sky. Winter shelters turn their open eye to the low sun so it can pour in and sit down. Summer shelters squint with narrow doors and deep eaves. Dark slabs at the hearth's back drink sunlight by day and give it back in long, quiet draughts by night. A line of pebbles set under the eave catches the first drips of rare rain into waiting shells and bark cups, small gutters for sudden generosity. Food landscapes get edits with fire and stone. You burn a ring around a favourite seedgrass patch so the next rain writes dense green. You return in weeks with baskets and a grin. You set drift fences, brush crooked lines that look like accidents along a ridge where small antelope travel. The maze opens toward your best throwing lanes and never toward your sleeping child. You rake coals over a rectangle of ground, then scrape them aside and lay thin sliced tubers to bake on the stored heat under a lid of leaves and earth. Hours later you knock and dinner answers from below, shy and sweet. Quirky tidbit, you string a few shells along the brush edge of camp so wind turns them into a soft rattle. At night, the difference between a breeze song and a sudden silent gap tells you when a cat has edited the wind. A similar string above the cache mouth tattles on thieves with paws or two curious hands. Low-tech alarm system powered by weather and nosiness. Insect politics bend to architecture. You set a dedicated smoke lane through the sleeping space, two narrow openings that let haze drift where midges like to party but where lungs won't file complaints. Bedding gets layered like a raspy grass ash. Sprinkles bitter leaves more grass so the tiny complaints move along. Remember the ochre and fat sunscreen from the hot marches. You smear a thin line of that along doorways and sleeve edges. It fills cracks that fleas love and confuses their taste in neighbourhoods. Engineering meet cosmetics. Some days you even ask the land to store cold for later. In late afternoon you pile rounded stones in a shallow pit open to the clear sky. At night, when air is mean to warmth and friendly to radiation, you spread wet reeds over those stones. In the morning, before the sun remembers its contract, you tuck fish or meat under the reed mat, where the breath of the stones feels cooler than the day. It isn't ice, it's just enough tempering that lunch tastes like it waited in the shade instead of the sun's pocket. Grandmothers curate the don't burn that list. Patchy fire as a friend, scorched earth is an enemy that wears your face. You leave corridors unburned as freeway and refuge. You skip the nest thicket even when the fuel tempts you. You keep flame on a leash near tree stands that summon food in 3 months if they live through today. Historians still argue whether broad-scale landscape burning by small bands was common across continents in deep prehistory, or whether it blossomed mainly later with denser populations and longer stays. Out here, the rule is humble: burn, small watch, big leave exits. Weather becomes a co-worker you schedule. You stack wood by size and dryness under the drip line so a sudden storm doesn't turn your fire plan into mime. You pin thatch with forked green twigs that shrink as they dry, natural clamps that get bossier with time. You stitch seams with sinew that tightens overnight, then seal with warmed pitch, mixed with ash so it doesn't crack when the shelter stretches in the heat. Light joke 3, if you pitched this as a home renovation show, it'd be called Extreme Make-Under, because the whole aesthetic is less wind, more nap. Energy budgets hide in the details. A shorter door loses less heat. A sleeping ledge off the floor shuns cold puddles of air. A reflective grease-smeared stone behind the lamp doubles light so you can stretch one wick of fat through a long story. You stage tasks by climate grind seed when the breeze is kind. Scrape hides in the shade school of noon. Haul wood in the crisp gossipy hour before dawn. Remember the termite cumpious mounds that line up north-south. You borrow their wisdom and orient your shelter to the same quiet rhythm, thin edge to noon, broad face to dawn and dusk, so the day warms you gently and the night forgives. Some engineering is social. You rotate camps between a high windy perch that stays bite-free after rains and a lower sheltered bowl that holds warmth in cold snaps. You place the latrine downwind and gifted ash. You keep the water path separate and remind splashy children with a song that rhymes river with never. You run the spare stopper drill until even the sleepy can find plan beak in the dark. Under the slow spin of stars, your edits add up. The burn ring grows a green fringe. The fish V catches the tide with quiet competence. The pit stays cool enough that fat remembers how to be patient. The shelter breathes where smoke needs to walk and tightens where wind wants to gossip. You're not terraforming, you're whispering. The climate doesn't soften, your margins do. And in a world that still has hyena auditors, sudden squalls and months that forget kindness, a few engineered inches of mercy are exactly the habitat your sleep requires. You keep walking until continents run out of ways to say difficult. The desert tries minimalism first, no trees, no shade, just light so bright it edits edges off rocks and makes distance lie. You answer with patience. Your cloak becomes a moving tent, your pace a negotiation with your own sweat. You travel when shadows stretch long enough to count as companions. You nap when heat plays percussion on stone. The eggshell canteen rides in its reed sleeve. Plan beak, your spare stopper, taps your belt like a metronome that keeps you honest. Light joke 1, your skincare routine is still ochre and fat with a hint of dust, SPF. Some please finally. Dunes don't obey, but they do confess. Uread ripple crests leaning from prevailing winds. Slip faces pointing like lazy arrows the darker foot of a dune where the night kept a little cool. When a mirage pretends to be water, you don't chase. You watch birds commute low and straight, and you trail them at dawn to the kind of damp that keeps vows. Quirky tidbit at the edge of a fog-licked desert, you stretch a hide on a frame at night, and in the morning you lick the little beads the air left behind dew as a side hustle caught by a portable sky. High plateaus switch the insult. The sun still burns, but the air forgets to be thick. You go into that 3-part dance step breath count until your lungs and the horizon sign a truce. Your cloak turns fur inward. Your shoes swallow grass for insulation. Your hood keeps a fragile warmth from climbing out. Remember that rumour about mountain cousins and their quiet gift for altitude. You can feel the genes whisper in how you stop getting headaches quite so often, in how the dizzy spells step back when you don't hurry stairs made of air. Historians still argue whether those high corridor helpers handed you a crucial lung trick once or many times, whether the advantage rode in on one valley's friendship or a whole braid of meetings. You don't publish a paper. You publish a sunrise without dizziness. Icy coasts are deserts that learn to howl. The wind tastes like iron. The ocean keeps a knife under every wave. You answer with fat and flame. A shallow lampstone bowl wick of plant fibre fuel from the sea visits a soft circle of heat onto your shelter wall. Stone-warm smoke behaves, breath stops fogging the world into mystery. Mainstream historical fact, peoples of far north coasts use narrow-slit snow goggles carved from bone or wood to tame snow blindness, simple apertures that turn fierce glare into manageable light. You scrape your own pair and discover that seeing less sometimes means seeing more. Light joke 2. Congratulations, you're wearing sunglasses that also happen to be a tiny door. The icy pantry doesn't do AB, but it does do enough. Fish weirs of son pinch tide into generosity. Seal breath holes turn into patient vigils you keep with still shoulders and a spear that warms just behind the haft. Meat dries like flag cloth in air, so cold it forgets rot. Fat renders into comfort you can pour. Your shelter squints into the low sun and opens its eye to afternoon warmth while refusing to gossip with the night wind. You stitch fur with a bone needle you didn't invent but certainly admire. You bind ankles so drafts learn manners. You lay hot stones near ribs and think very fond thoughts about geology. And then there is water without land, the oldest door that still makes your stomach tilt. You have already stepped islands to Sahul on a careful dawn. Remember the day you put your ember bone in a covered shell and pushed your luck across blue. Now open water asks you to trust woodwind and the Shire hints. Long swells running under short chop lines of cloud stitched over currents, the traffic of birds that sleep on the wing and point toward rookeries as clearly as any signpost. You launch when the moon keeps tide honest. You read star paths as if they were drawn for you, belt angled like a friendly door bright dog star rising, where the coast will be by morning. Historians still argue whether the earliest feet in new lands followed a coastal kelp highway, first living on shellfish and seaweed's generosity, or whether an inland ice-free corridor opened soon enough to matter. The debate sways like a mast in crosswind. You do what your ankles and stomach agree on. Keep land in sight when you can. Keep calm in sight when you can't. At the edges, sand seas, sky-high grasslands, coasts rimmed with ice. Channels stitched with island bones, you start to wear your skills like a layered cloak. Water reading from the dry weeks, fire tending from the cave months, seed grinding from the lean seasons. Songline maps from the long walks, sharing rules from every feast you diluted into tomorrow. Each trick slips into the pocket of another. The hyena auditors still visit, of course. They also exist in waves and weathering cliffs that throw rocks, when frozen water changes its mind, in dunes that remember your footprints only long enough to tease. You bank the ember, check the stopper tie, the spare, warm the stone, string the shells on the windbreak, and take one last look at the sky before sleep. Light joke 3. Your project manager is still the climate, but at least now you've hacked its calendar. People leave prints where maps run out. A fish trap far below the tide line whispers that someone else trusted the moon's schedule. A charred ring on a beach where driftwood dreams says, "You're not the first to convince wind to be polite." A painted hand on a cliff that only catches sunrise tells you the old truth in fresh ochre: we were here. We plan to be here again. You add your own small edit, a trio of stones and a leaf tucked beside a spring, a reed lattice over a generous seep and a neat plug for an eggshell. Someone else might be grateful to fill, The moral glue from the fireside travels because ritual is portable, and you have a lot of travelling left in you. Night finally wraps the last of the edges. Desert stars stare with 1,000 dry eyes. Plateau moons rise flat and big as a lid. Polar aurora writes soft green on the cold. Equatorial constellations turn exactly the right distance when you line them up with a notch in a ridge. The windproofs you stitched don't argue. The lamp doesn't smoke much. The snow goggles hang on a peg like polite beetles. The eggshell clicks once against the reed sleeve and then forgives you for not refilling it yet. You pull the hide to your chin, tuck toes against the warm rock that remembers your name, and let the world, harsh, beautiful, unbothered, watch you sleep without quite managing to scare you anymore. Breathe in slow through your nose and let it leave by itself like smoke that knows the door. The fire is small now, banked into a soft red smile. The shelter holds its shape around you, a pocket of air that has decided to be kind. Outside, the night is busy with its own chores, wine smoothing one last ripple from the sand frost, practicing a faint silver on grass, a far wave sorting pebbles by size, and none of it requires your opinion. Let your shoulders settle as if the bedding remembers them. The ember is safe in its little ash nest. It will wait for morning the way mornings always do. Your hands can forget the tools for a while. The Swiss Army rock the digging stick, the brand with its very confident end. Let the names of things drift farther apart. Dune Ridge, Spring Star. They can keep themselves company. Your breath has the only job worth doing now, and it is very good at it. If thoughts try to rehearse tomorrow, roots tides the polite lie of distance. Let them turn into smaller pictures, the shine where water beads on a leaf at dawn, the sound a shell makes when wind has time to play it, the soft tick of a bone charm against your wrist when you roll over. Each picture can fade at the edges until it is only colour, then only warmth, then nothing you need to hold. Somewhere in the dark, hyena auditors may laugh. Glaciers may breathe slowly, or waves may gossip with the moon. None of them are invitations. Tonight you keep a quiet circle, and the world agrees to walk around it. The lamp goes to one clear thread of flame, then to a memory. Your cloak grows heavier in the nicest way. Even the air seems to hum a little like a fan in a summer room far in the future. Close your eyes, the map will wait. The ember will wait. Morning will right itself whether you watch or not. For now, let the long story of survival turn down its volume and become a lullaby written in breath.